And broadcast now.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Thursday, 11th of June, 2020 virtual meeting of the Newburyport Historical Commission. As you can, if you're on the Zoom meeting and have video, you can see the note that explains about the nature of these virtual meetings. I'll do a roll call of the commissioners and tenants in just a moment. But I'll just say a couple of quick words about the fact that how we conduct these virtual meetings if you're new to this. If the panelists have audio that's available to them and video that's available, that some of them this week, since it's new, they can either opt to use it or not. I have mine turned on so you can see me. There may be public hearings during tonight's public meeting. Just so you understand the difference, the meeting is public. The entire meeting is public, but there are but the public does not have a chance to speak unless it's a public hearing portion of the meeting, at which point it'll be obvious because I'll open it to public comment, so on. If that should happen and you'd like to speak, please use the feature of the Zoom meeting to raise your hand. Hopefully you can take a few minutes to try to find where that is on your particular device. And Andy Port, who is who's sharing his screen and helping coordinate and run the virtual meeting, will we'll be looking out for that, and we'll be able to recognize you one at a time. All right. If we do have that, I'll encourage you to keep your comments brief and to the point so we can keep things moving along. We have a relatively full agenda, but I think we can get through it okay. So let's get started if we could. I'll do a roll call of the commissioners. Let's see, starting with, this is myself, Clem Richards, Chair, our Vice Chair, Patricia Pecknick. Are you here?
Yes.
Okay, Christopher Fay.
Here.
Thank you. And Peter McNamee.
Here.
Ron Ziemba.
Yes, I'm here, Glenn.
Okay, and Joe Morgan.
Here.
Okay, so we're missing Malcolm Carnwath at the moment. He may join late, but we do have a quorum, so we can get started. So we also have, I'm been told that we have Attorney Lisa Mead will be presenting on behalf of clients at 342 Merrimack Street and 35 Monroe Street, as well as Eileen Graff. I'm not sure whether she's another attorney or designer / architect. And also there's Marika Miller and Scott Brown for the 39 Harbor Street item. The first item on tonight's agenda, as you can see there, it's a motion to continue for 3-5 School Street. That's also represented by Attorney Mead of Mead, Tellerman and Costa. Attorney Mead, assuming you're on and attending, do you need to say anything to that, or should we just proceed to entertain a motion to continue that to I believe there was a date, 7/28 was the date I was told the request to continue is.
That would be fine, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So to move things right along, I'll go ahead and make that motion, which someone can second if they see fit. So the motion is to continue the matter of 3-5 School Street, continue without, I always stall on that word.
Without prejudice.
Yes, thank you. Continue without prejudice to July 28, 2020. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All right, thank you, Christopher. So I'll do, in these virtual meetings, we've been doing a sort of a roll call. So I'll start with myself. I am a yes. Patricia Pecknick?
Yes.
Yes. Christopher Fay?
Yes.
Ron Ziemba?
Yes.
Okay, Joe Morgan?
Yes.
Peter McNamee?
Yes.
Okay. So that makes all of us. So Attorney Mead, so we will, let me make a note here so I can keep track of these various things that we voted to continue to 7/28. Okay. Thank you, everybody. I'm glad that at least we're off to a roaring start. See how much momentum we can continue. The next item on the agenda is 342 Merrimack Street. I'll just do a very quick refresher for everyone as to where this stands, because we started this 2 weeks ago. This is a demo delay application and kind of combined with a preservation and restriction discussion. I won't go over all the details in this, but basically at the last meeting, it was determined that the structure is historically significant and preferably preserved. There was some quite a bit of discussion about the nature of the structure and what should or shouldn't be preserved and so on. There was a report, which I think I copied all the commissioners on my meeting report, and I sent a sort of a version of that to Attorney Mead, which she and the applicants have responded to. So in the gist of my report was that to do a preservation restriction, what that means in essence is that you're preserving something or you're adhering to the kind of accepted standards of preservation. So the historically significant features of the exterior would in fact need to be preserved. I was referring, and I made specific reference to a couple of things such as the wick revival trim, the old / possibly original windows, or I should say windows that might date to the 1842 renovation, and features of that nature that date to that period. And the applicant, I was very happy to see that they are amenable to nearly all of that. The two items that I was able to identify that we might need to just try to resolve tonight are what to do about the what is sometimes called a portico, sometimes called a bay. It's the extension on the second floor that extends over the front entry door and on the streets, the front of the structure. And there's one window that's on the back that was in your window inventory. And by the way, thank you for doing that. We appreciated that window inventory that you did. Is shown as an old 6/6 window, and the current plans is because I'm assuming there's a kitchen counter or something that needs to go there, so you want to take that out. So so we can talk about that. So that's kind of a quick recap of where we stand now, and I hope the commission has had a chance to review the revised plans that have been submitted and posted for a few days now. So why don't I stop there and invite Ms. Mead, if you have comment or anything you'd like to either respond to or say at this point, you may do so.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lisa Mead, me telling Costa 30 Green Street on behalf of Dan and Judy Lynch of 342 Merrimack Street. And you did a nice overview, and I think that that's true. I think hopefully there are two issues outstanding. One is the portico, and I remind the board that we did note, and we have found that the portico does not appear on the 1884 map, but does appear in 1924 on the 1924 assessor's map. And so certainly not original to the house, and was probably likely added between 84 and 24. And both the 1980 Form B as well as the updated Form B indicate that they think that the portico was constructed in the early 1900s. So Andy, if you could advance this, please. So you'll see here on the 1884 map, there's no portico. You might blow that up a little bit, Andy. So it's the CH car lot. There's no
Right.
portico there. And then if you go to the next map, Andy.
What was the date of that one?
That's 1884,
Mhm.
Chair. So if you go to the next one, there it is. The
Yeah,
portico.
is this the so-called Sanborn Map
That's
series?
the 1924 assessor's map.
Oh, assessor's map. Okay, thanks.
So that does appear there. So, obviously I don't know the exact date of it. The indicators that we have are that it was built in that time period. And the historians that did the Form Bs that were reviewed by MHC believes that it was built, added after 1900. So Andy, if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So again, we heard the applicants heard the board commission loud and clear last time, and certainly understand some of the concerns that the board had. This plan marks the proposed areas of demolition. Obviously, the decking and the extra egress in the back, the two-story shed structure that was later added, and all of you, I think, saw that was needed to come down. And so to expose the gable end of that original L. We are proposing to take the portico down. That's our preference here. We are leaving the original door on the right-hand side of the building as you face it. With the transom, that's now not going anywhere. It's staying right there. We do propose, as you said, Mr. Chair, to remove that window to the right of the door, and I'll have Mr. Curie, the architect, go over that in a moment. And then on the front of the house, the door is not original, but the side lights and the framing around there are. So the applicant is not proposing to change that out as he originally was, but to change the door. And I think most of the commissioners saw that door. And then the applicant is proposing to remove the portico over. And then if you go to the next slide, Andy, I might add that the applicant then is also proposing that, and we'll go through these windows in a minute, that the later added Brosco windows with springs be changed out, but that the older windows that we don't believe are original because there are some screws in them and whatnot, but that are older, that they be retained. So we are proposing to do that. So Andy, with that, if you could go to the next slide. So here is kind of a hand-drawn inventory, which shows the Broscos with springs in number 1. Number 2 are the 6/1 older windows, and number 3 are the 6/6 older windows. And if you could go to the next slide, Andy. So, and then actually, if you go to the final slide, I'm going to turn it over to David, who can talk to you about the more detailed plans. This plan would become the plan or whatever, obviously the board decides, but the plan, the idea is to have a plan that becomes an exhibit as part of the preservation restriction. Hence the details on this plan. So David, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about any architectural features you'd like to point out in more detail than I have, and maybe particularly the window over the front door that replaces the portico.
Thank you, Lisa. David Curie, Curie Design, 437 Merrimack Street. And we did meet on site. And as you said, in the next round of drawings here, we've definitely retained a few more items, particularly that side door. The window in question next to it on the right does come up a little bit on the sill. As you can see, that's the proposed version to the right of that door, which comes up about 8 inches or so, 8 inches to a foot sill height, and matches the windows elsewhere in the kitchen. That's part of the kitchen, which is why they wanted it at that height. On the other side, the only change there was a bracketed roof overhang over the door that we had in the last version. On the front, we'd had quite a bit of discussion at the last meeting about what the center window arrangement could be. We drew about 8 different options for the client, for the Lynches, and they liked this one the best. There were several versions. We had started with a triple window before last meeting, and in the last meeting we had presented one that was a single flanked by a 6/6 flanked by 2 that were 4/4s. I think it was Malcolm that suggested, what about something that looks more like a side light? That was actually one of the commissioners who suggested this one. They liked this one the best. and feel it's in keeping. There are examples, perhaps not right in town, but examples of federal buildings that have various treatments of that center window. And oftentimes it's a single, but oftentimes it's something very different. So we feel this is not straying too far, and looks well with the house. And then with regard to the door, as Lisa indicated, we're going to replace the front door as we proposed before with a new 6-panel wood door, but retain everything else. There is a ceiling on there now, so that small pediment would be in keeping. The very top of that large pediment above it would be crowned to be in keeping with the federal doorway. The windows were interesting. Once we took the look at them, we realized those lower ones aren't 6/6. They're 6/1s, and we don't think they're original, but they're certainly old. And the clients would have decided that if this is a preservation, that they would preserve those and get them back into working order, glaze them. The upper ones, being Brosco sashes in sash packs, they will replace with something nicer. We had proposed the Marvin window and would replace them as sash packs, meaning that the sashes would be the same size as they are now. And the casing on the outside, which is historic, would be able to stay. We felt that was the best win as far as coming to some sort of compromise and something that would not be original, but would look nice with the rest of the structure. I think that's about it. If anybody has any question.
Yeah, I had one quick question, and I have a couple of comments. I think I know the answer to this, but just want to check. On the, when Ms. Mead was talking about trying to date the portico, was there any other investigation or research attempted other than the maps and that sort of thing?
The maps, the Form Bs, and then the Eric Dre, who did the update on the Form B and did the investigation last year in preparation for going to Mass Historic, which you all have his report. He is the one that also looked at that and confirmed after examination that he thought it was also after 1900s.
Okay.
And architect.
Okay, a couple of quick comments. When referring to the extension on the rear L, while it has a shed-style roof, it's not a shed. So could we call that the shed-roofed extension or something similar? Because I found that there was some confusion caused by referring to it as a shed, which, as you know, normally refers to an accessory building of some sort.
Yes. Sure.
What's my other question? Mr. Curie, you said, that the front entrance would, and you talked about this, and I think we're in agreement that the rebuilding of that, with the removal of the portico, the rebuilding of that front becomes somewhat conjectural based on, other examples, what is known to be in keeping with the style and so on. It seems like we all understand that. You did use the term returning the entrance to federal style. I think it would be more correct to say that returning it to a Greek revival style, which would be consistent with everything else on the exterior of the house at this point. Now, at the meeting 2 weeks ago, and I'll give my commissioners a chance to speak now, 2 weeks ago, I heard a lot of us on the commission expressing various opinions about the portico. The reason I was so interested in the research was because I think it's best to keep things out of the realm of, our personal opinions as to whether we like it or not. Rather try to base our decisions on something that, that can be justified on the basis of either some kind of evidence or well, just something a little bit more objective. So I'm okay with accepting that portico was probably not part of the 1842 update. And as far as I don't really, stylistically wise, I think whether I like it or not is irrelevant, but I've been thinking a lot about whether it's okay to rebuild sort of conjecturally, but before I go much further, I'd like to give my fellow commissioners a chance to react to what's been presented so far and offer their comments, questions, suggestions, what have you. So if you, it looks like everyone pretty much except Ron is on mute at the moment. You can, please feel free to raise a hand and be recognized. Okay, Patricia has put up a hand. You want to go ahead, Patricia?
Yes, I don't object to demoing the portico bay if the commission feels like it's appropriate, but I do think one of our responsibilities, as you said, on every application, but especially on a preservation restriction, is to give the city as much information as we can gather about the age of things that are going to be demoed so that our report is as complete as possible. So again, it's fine to say to the applicant that we don't even know what to call this and we don't know when it was built and demoing it might be appropriate. But in order to answer back to the city and the public record, I just want to make a few comments so that our deliberations reflect our own efforts to sort of date this thing. We know it wasn't original to the house. As you said at the last meeting, we don't know. Yeah, maybe it's from the early 20th century. Maybe it's during the time the Currier family owned it. It looked like the trim on the windows matches. Maybe it's from the 1880s when the extension was built. There's only one of these in town, so unfortunately we can't really date it by comparison. I think we have very limited evidence from the documents. So, the 1970 Form B said that it was added in the 20th century, and therefore the 1980 Form B and the updated Form B say the same thing. When you look at the 1980 Form B, she has cited the assessor's records from 1890 to 1980. And it would have been helpful if she had given us a better reference. In other times, we could have gone to the archival center at the library or City Hall and pulled the old assessor's maps. I will say that for our purposes as a commission, the assessor's maps are great because they're government documents for tax purposes. We only have the one that's presented here from 1924. The Sanborn maps, I think, are great sources because they were for public safety. So they show the doors and windows on the first floor, but they wouldn't show this bay anyway. And in my opinion, the 1884 Walker maps from the Atlas of Essex County, they're produced by this Boston publisher for travel and tourism. They're not government documents. They're not really going to tell us which house had a bay window on the second floor or whatever that is. So for our commission's sake, in order to document things that are going to be demoed, especially, I showed the photo to a couple of contacts I have through the National Trust. And one of them, who's the Deputy Director of Preservation Connecticut, said that little rooms like this, atop entry porches, started being built, in significant numbers right after the Civil War, which makes sense to me as an historian because as soon as the antebellum South was gone, people started romanticizing it, borrowing this architectural language, so to speak. And then I showed it to the city planner of Burlington, Vermont, who was saying, seaport towns like this are good. You find good examples of sometimes really anomalous architectural features because people traveled and had access to money. And as a maritime city, who knows, maybe somebody went somewhere down south and saw one and liked it. And by the way, P.S. Andy, if you're listening, Mary O'Neill, the Burlington city planner, met you here at a planning conference a few years ago. And she told me to tell you that you're living a dream being a planner here.
Thank you.
And then finally, when I looked at it, especially the square columns and the stone plinths, I said, okay, it's early 20th century. could be the early 1920s. But then I saw these photos in McAllister's Field Guide to American Houses. And if you happen to find those, Andy, I just want to show the other people on the commission sort of what I learned from looking at this field guide. I saw one example from the early 19th century where it has the same square columns and little stone plinths on a Greek Revival house. And McAllister's explained that that square column made out of boards and molding with the little stone plinths starts to appear in the mid 19th century. And then the second photo has a house from 1910 that's a very simple sort of folk house that also tried to have the same columns and plinths. So Andy, can you look at do you mind flipping to the next picture? Yeah, so I it's just interesting to me when you look at material facts and you look at documents, I think it's important for us as a commission to assure the public that when we're approving a demo, we're doing our best to sort of build up any information that we might have on it. So that's what I want to say about that, the portico and sort of efforts that I made. And then I have more to say, but I will yield to Mr. Ziemba. Thank you.
Thanks, Patricia.
Oh.
Yeah, go ahead, Ron. You got your hand
Thank
up.
you. Thank you. As far as the portico is concerned, I'm happy with the way it has come out. I think you've got a very handsome looking house from the front now, which whatever the merits of that room upstairs or that area upstairs with the three windows, whatever merits it might have had on the inside, it didn't do much, in my opinion, for the outside. So I'm happy to agree with everybody who's spoken so far on the absence of the portico. And I think the 262 arrangement on the windows was an inspired choice, because having that just that one lonely window above the door just didn't seem to give this house the prominence that it deserves. And so I'm happy with this solution, and I think we should go ahead with it.
Okay, thank you, Ron. But while you still have the floor there, Ron, any thoughts on the window that I mentioned? There's a historical window on the back, the right-hand side of the house. And one of the things I was thinking was maybe one possibility would be to reuse that same window in another opening that's the same size, but I'm not sure if that would work, where so many of the others are 6/1. But that was just a thought I had. I'm just kind of would hate to see that go. I wonder if, Mr. Kier, if there's been any attempt to see if the interior layout would accommodate that window, or if that just, was it even looked at?
We
Well,
certainly
is that the
have
place?
had some discussions, yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
We did have discussions about ways that we could detail things. That the counter was preferred there, but I would, at the end of the day, I would defer to my client if somehow that one was just a non-starter. It's a preferred option on their part because of the counter there. It's a little hard to do a window, 8 inches or so lower than the counter. But there are details that exist out there within the community. I know
I'm very familiar with that particular problem because I have it in my kitchen where I've got the counter that drops down to the windowsill. It's very awkward. Anyway, so Ron, sorry we sort of interrupted you there. Did you want to say something else about the window or anything?
Well, I'm just wondering if I'm thinking of the right window here. Isn't this the window that has a mate to it, and they're both in the kitchen, and so there is some benefit to having the windows identical?
It's, okay, in this page that Andy's now displaying, it's the one immediately to the right of the door. To go to the right,
of the
Andy.
door. Yeah.
It's the right-hand one.
Whoops, I'm sorry. It's you go to the drawing to the right of that.
There you go. So you see where it says new kitchen window and the arrow
Right.
pointing to that one. That
Right.
that used to be the same size as the one on the left with the hexagon there, but it's 6/6 instead of 6/1.
Right, but it's still a mate to the window that's to the right of that.
Which is proposed. It's not there yet. That's a new addition that's
Yeah.
proposed. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah. I have no problem with that.
Yeah. Okay. And Mr. Curie, this reminds me, seeing the detail on this. Oh, I believe in my comments back to you guys. If I can be so informal, that it's the standards for putting an addition on a historic house suggest or recommend, however you want to word it, that you not copy the historical trim and molding so that the new construction can be distinguished from the original. So have you thought about how you would accomplish that by not having identical Greek Revival trim on the windows, for example? Yeah, like there, but just having, let the new addition be a new addition and recognizable as such, so it's distinguished from the original house.
Yeah, oftentimes you encounter that, and it seems to play out differently with every project. There are projects that we do. The best phrase I have is stealth architecture that somebody, an architect from Falmouth, used once in doing some of his projects and I know that that's not quite the standards sometimes with in preservation. So we have a straight corner board there. We didn't copy
Right.
the corner board in this instance, and obviously the one-story piece is different with the roof. That's a different element. If it was taken away completely, also as part of the standards, this structure, the original structure would be as it is, intact, and would not have changed. So the jog in, we feel it was nice to separate those planes. The jog out on the other side, slightly out, was a good way to separate this building. The only thing that, is a copycat, I guess was what I'd say, is the trim around the window. And perhaps we felt that was a 2020 nod to the originals, but
Okay. All right, and I see Patricia has a hand up, and Ron, your hand is still up. Did you want to add anything more, or is that just?
Oh, I'm done.
Okay. Patricia, your hand, I think, went back up. Did you want to comment?
One of the things I wanted to, I guess, hear from everybody about this window, I would find it difficult on a preservation restriction to see that, the windows, a new windows being cut or the dimensions are being changed. On the west elevation, I noticed there's a new side entry. I like the bracketed overhang. I think even though the door is being cut into the 1880s edition, I don't object, but I'm happy for someone to explain why I should. And then in the front, last meeting, Mr. McNamee and I were both talking about preferring a single window. I think that you as chair, and maybe as I heard it tonight, Ron, think that this three-part window, since it did exist on Greek Revival houses, is also appropriate. But I'm wondering what other folks are thinking about those three things: the new door in the west elevation, demoing the historic window on the east elevation, and then this front window. I don't know if we resolved that yet. So.
And Mr. Curie, if I remember correctly, the door that Patricia is referring to is where you're opening a window opening that's in the rear L. Today it's a window and making that into a door. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's the driveway side.
Right.
And there's a mud room there. And
Right. And does that jog in slightly as well on that side or not? I can't remember.
no.
It's more or less flush.
Maybe inches, but it's
Yeah.
there's trim
Okay.
there.
I know there's that corner board there, that sort of pilaster type thing. Okay. Anybody else on the commission? People have been fairly quiet. I don't see any other hands up, but I want to make sure everyone's had an opportunity to speak if they'd like to. So, Mr. Morgan, I see your hand come up. You're recognized.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm questioning the treatment of the windows with the new Marvin fiberglass with simulated divided lights. It seems that we're saying that if this is a preservation and we've decided not to keep the portico, there's some interpretation of this as also being a restoration, a historical restoration. I think in conjunction with the guidelines for historic windows, that we would want to see a restoration of any replacement windows here. If we replace a window, assuming we're not preserving it to its 1980s vintage, Brosco series or brand, then we would also want to restore those windows in a more historical material and design, which would be solid wood and true divided lights. And so that's my major comment. And then of course I would still want to see the chimney also looked at structurally for a possible rehabilitation of that also. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. A quick question on that chimney. Has there been any, what is to cut to the chase, what is the condition of that? Do you have functioning fireplaces that use that chimney? Is it something that's more of a historical feature that's still there but not in use, or or what?
Mr. Chair, this is Lisa Mead,
Yep.
and I think that somebody asked this question on the site walk, and Dan has just replied to me as well. It's recently been inspected. It's fully used. It's sound. There are no issues with that chimney. They do use it in the house for sure. I think
Okay.
maybe Peter that asked about the chimney. Maybe somebody asked about it. Asked about the fireplaces actually on the site walk. So it's in full use.
Okay. All right. So, and I think just so everyone's clear, my understanding from your plans, you were pretty clear, I believe, that that chimney and associated masonry, that was all no change was planned for that.
That's correct.
Right.
Correct.
Well, Joe, your hand, okay. Joe, your hand is still up. Were you done, or did you have anything more to say?
No, but thank you for the clarification on the chimney. That satisfies me there. But my comments regarding the windows are still need to be satisfied, I think.
Right. Well, yeah. Well, yeah. This is kind of a little bit of a gray area. So about windows, touching back to the one by the kitchen, I think that Patricia made this point, and I would agree that we're trying to. There's no getting around the fact that some things are going to be updated and changed, and I think my sense of the commission is that we understand that, and no one is saying, putting a hard stop on all of that. For example, the portico discussion, I think, the sense that I get is that people feel that it's, for a number of reasons, that should be permitted to be removed, and the front elevation be restored somewhat conjecturally, we understand, but restored to what would very likely have been how it looked in the Greek Revival period of around the mid-century of actually 19th century. And then, but those historical features that are currently there and in good shape or rehabilitatable, like the trim, yeah, we all know it needs scraping, painting, what have you. Hopefully that can be saved without too much trouble. But you know, that old window in the back is part of the that original structure. So I personally think that to feel that we've done our due diligence and preserved as much as reasonable, you know, we should save that. As far as now let's get to the windows Joe's bringing up on like the second story, these 80s windows. So here, it's more of a, as he points out, it's more of like a restoration than simple preservation, because no one is really interested in preserving a non-historic, later added feature of, you know, dubious value, such as those Brosco windows. I don't remember offhand, maybe Mr. Keary or someone who is familiar with the specific windows, although I see it there actually. Let me see if it's my window. I can see it's partly cut off by replaced with Marvin Integrity fiberglass with wood interior. So I assume the exterior is fiberglass, the interior is wood, applied Muntin bars. So so it's not true divided light. It's is it like one thermal pane? Yeah, thank you, Andy. One pane of glass that has applied Muntins, and are there any internal spacers, or is it just applied on both sides, or what? Let's see.
Correct. Both sides with a spacer bar, so it is a simulated, what is called a simulated divided light.
Okay.
As prepared.
Okay, and do you, is there, in your plans anywhere, do you have any specs as to what the profile of the Muntins are, or any of that? Mainly on the exterior is mainly what we're concerned about here.
It's a putty glaze look. We don't have that in the plan. We don't have a detail of that window, only the spec.
Okay, and I think, Patricia, I think your hand's been up for a while. Did you want to jump into this with a comment?
No, I just wanted to second what Mr. Morgan said about, you know, true divided lights and the applied Muntins. It's sort of cringy to think about that. And the chimney, what he said about the chimney. I also just wanted to quickly say that Bob Yarrow, he was the urban planner who was mentioned on the updated Plan B. He's now at the School of Design at UPenn, and he said he was so pleased to see that the Lynch's plan for the restoration of the front and side facades of this house, which has a very special character and history. He was amused that he was listed as a person of great renown on the updated Form B. So,
okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
if I could answer a couple of questions. My clients have agreed to keep the kitchen window.
Okay.
So obviously you can make that a condition of the decision, because that plan will have to change. So that kitchen window on that side would stay. And they'll make the adjustment interior, as I'm sure you are familiar with.
Yeah.
And then I think Mr. Curie has he does have the dimensions of the Muntins. You know, this is the windows, and David can speak up here, the windows above. So all the ones that are not original, but old on the first floor at the street level are going to be restored, right? And those are the public view and the most easily accessed. There's some work to be done, certainly for, you know, obviously insulation, and when you're redoing a house and trying to update it somewhat to reduce some of the problems with infiltration of air and whatnot. And so the commission in the past, and the city generally, has been okay with these windows, particularly that Marvin Integrity series, where you have wood on the inside. And so since it's the putty-like, and they're the
3/4 inch.
raising, and they're on the second floor, and not easily accessible immediately from the street, we would like the board's consideration of that. I certainly understand where the board's coming from and what they're looking for, but in this particular instance, the windows are Brosco spring-loaded windows on that floor and in other places. And they're certainly going to be upgraded dramatically from what exists today. And so we would like the board's consideration with what the window that is proposed, given that the applicant is in fact restoring and rehabilitating all of those windows along the first floor, and then obviously the ones that are marked on the sides, and now keeping the kitchen window as well.
Yeah. And I will say, thank you, Ms. Mead, for Joe, while I'm still relatively new myself, I've been on this commission long enough to know that there is precedent. It is not unusual to approve windows that of that nature. I can't. That is with a some man-made material on the outside, especially where it's going to, once it's painted, it will be virtually impossible to distinguish, especially on the second floor. It's a little bit analogous to the hardy plank siding, it's, yes, it's a newer man-made material. It's not historic, but for all intents and purposes, you really, can't tell once you're more than a few feet away. So it's really down to the true divided light or not. I know that, I don't know if Marvin makes those available. I know some companies do. They're probably more expensive, isn't everything. Why don't I do this? I'm very happy to hear that I think we've come a long way, and I think we're pretty close to resolving things to the point where we can get everything down in writing and, not tonight, obviously, but come to an agreement in principle tonight, and then get it all documented so that we have a solid preservation restriction that the commission feels is adequately detailed to our satisfaction, that things that need to be preserved will be preserved, and you guys can continue on with trying to get your project underway. So let me do a quick straw poll of the commission. If we have agreement that, well, would people not be willing to go forward with this with, see, there's two issues. There's the window over the front, sort of the I liken it to part of a Palladian window in terms of, it's like the Palladian window without the central semicircle over the middle section almost. And it looks like you're showing the two 2/2 side windows in the front center there as being operable sash windows. I don't know if you were planning that or have them more imitative of the windows flanking the doorway below and have just fixed windows. Is that, Mr. Carey, is any comment on that? Were those intended to be operable or fixed?
The 2/2s are shown as operable, yes.
Yeah, so that was the idea. All right.
Yes.
All right, anyway. I'd like to get a sense of if we have enough, if we basically have support for going forward with the windows as described at present, that is the simulated divided lights, and that I'll call it a tripartite window with the front, but the other things that we established being said. So if there are my fellow commissioners, if you would have objection to that, can you raise your hand and be, recognized? Okay, I see Patricia, your hand is raised.
Yeah, I think for a restoration, the window in the front needs to look like it would have looked like in the federal period. We had the example of 2 Merrimack Court, which was the other house owned by Courier. So for my money, I understand what's being done with this sort of triplex window thing, but if it weren't going to involve a preservation restriction, I would perhaps feel differently about it. But given that we are going to be saying, yes, we approve the PR on this, I can't get down with the window there.
Okay. And Joe and Peter, I see you also have hands raised. Why don't we do Joe first and then Peter?
Yeah, I would second what Patricia just said and add that I also have to see the solid wood true divided windows if any windows are replaced.
Okay. And Peter McNamee?
Well, my preference is still for the single window over the front door. I'm not put off, and I don't think that the window as designed is completely out of place. However, I do have a problem with the 2/2s being operable. I think those, if they make it through the process, should be fixed to mirror what's happening down below with the front door. I think there's something a little bit off about it as it's drawn. As far as the divided lights, my preference would be the divided lights as well. I'm fine if that is not a product that's available, going with what's proposed.
Okay. Anyone else care to speak on this? Okay. Christopher Fay, I see your hand went up.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful for me and maybe for the owners and the architect and everybody. Peter suggested, so like, what is it that we're looking for in terms of that front window? If that's a sticking point, then what would be preferable? What could we advise the owner to come up with so we can move this forward?
Right. Well, I can answer for myself directly, and then I'll ask both Patricia and Joe who've commented on it, particularly Patricia, about going back to what would have been the federal period, which I think has some justification in that this sort of twin house just a couple doors down on Merrimack Court has what would have certainly been the traditional 5-bay federal arrangement. I'm where we're kind of reconstructing that section conjecturally anyway. I think as Peter just said, I think the single window is preferable to the 2 fixed side windows, similar, echoing what's below in the front door. That's a bit of a stretch, but I can sort of live with that. But I think the most authentic, or put it this way, the most reliably, historically, probably accurate would be the single window. So, and it sounds like the sense is that I think I'm hearing a strong sentiment that the windows should be true divided lights, where there is such an emphasis on restoration here. So Attorney Mead, do you want to kind of?
Yeah, I'm going to help you out here.
Yeah.
So the applicant, may I just first say thank God for texts.
Yeah, I know. I know wherever you speak.
Right. All right. So the applicant will do a single window over the front door, and then he will also be willing to do true divided light wood frame windows. And here's my question. Obviously, on the front, as you go to the side on the original structure, there also. But on the back in the addition, can he have the choice to either do single wood frame true divided light or the Marvin proposed?
Which windows are we talking about here? Up on the dormer or the second floor, or?
Right. So I'm suggesting that all of those windows, he have the choice to either do the single divided light, the wood frame divided light, or the Marvin is proposed. But
I see.
Right, but on the front,
right,
and on the sides of the original structure. So,
right,
if you
have true divided light.
The large box, right? Let's call it the larger box, the original structure of the larger box. L, unless you want it over that L, to have the divided lights.
Just let me clarify what we're talking about here. When you say, it sounds like you're describing wood framed 1/1 window versus the Marvin Integrity 6/6.
No, the same lights. It's the same lights, but the true divided.
Meaning
Wood frame, true
single
divided.
pane of glass. Correct. Or that is 6 individual panes of glass divided by Muntin bars.
On the front or the rear? I was trying to clarify the rear.
Okay. On the rear, I want him to have the choice to use the Marvin Integrity window that he has proposed.
Right.
On all of those windows.
Or what was the other option?
Well, you're asking for true divided lights.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay. So in other words, okay. So, all right. So it's simpler then. So you're just saying, would we permit the option to go with the Integrity series on the rear where it's not quite as sensitive?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Well, okay.
Especially in the new section, which
Right.
would then be
Well, certainly the kitchen addition that, certainly without question, you have the flexibility there. So let me turn to our fellow commissioners, or at this point, I think we could even entertain a motion, if it could be worded in such a way to, we might have to tune it a little bit to, it might get a little bit wordy, but I might take a stab at it. But anyway, how do people feel about that? It sounds like you have the main concerns we had coming into tonight were that starting with the smaller items, the window on the side, the upper right in this particular drawing we're looking at. So that's been resolved in favor of preservation. The windows on the front and sides, most historically and most visible sections, to have wood frame true divided lights per our preference. And finally, in the reconstruction, the conjectural reconstruction of the front, have a single window there. So it sounds like at least the concerns that I was aware of going in have been answered. Does anyone on the committee disagree? Because if not, I'll try to word a motion to move this forward. Yeah, go ahead. Is that Ron trying to speak?
Yeah. I want to make it clear that I remain opposed to the single window.
Oh, okay.
For me, the better solution there is the single window with the 2/2s on either side.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you, Ron. And I see, Joe, your hand is raised. Did you want to comment?
Yeah, I'll just clarify my previous comment. I think any replacement window should be solid wood, true divided light. Any new windows on the addition should be compatible with the historical windows. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Let's see. So let's see. I'm looking at the back. So looking at the upper left of this drawing, we're looking at obviously the windows that sort of double ganged window on the L, is that existing? I can't
No.
quite. That's new?
That is new.
Okay. So Joe,
at some point, Mr. Chair, at some point, Mr. Chair, it just doesn't make sense for my clients. So,
Well, yeah. I have no idea what the cost difference is. Maybe you've already researched that, and or your clients are aware of that. I'm assuming that was a combination of cost and maintenance avoidance issues. Why don't I do this? The only way to find out is to see if a motion will pass. So I'm going to attempt to word a motion. So here goes. The motion would be to let me think for a second how best to word this. We're to permit the lifting of the demo delay that's currently in effect, and draft a preservation restriction and preservation plan. Those may be one or separate documents that encompass all the things we agreed to tonight, specifically the preservation of exterior features, existing window and door trim, existing front entrance, and I believe it's the east side entrance, restoration of first floor historic windows, replacement of 1980s era windows with wood frame true divided light 6/6 windows. And for the sake of this motion, I'll say, I'm hesitant about the back because we have changes there as well. My own, okay, I'll go out on a limb here somewhat and interject my own personal feelings into this, and for the sake of being somewhat flexible, and say that on the rear elevation only, that the replacement, when replacing 80 windows, that they can be of the Marvin Integrity series, which would look substantially similar to what was historically there, even though technically that's not true to the letter of restoration. So I know that was a long-winded motion, but I think that captures what we're trying to accomplish. Is there someone willing to second that motion?
I'll second that.
I'm sorry, and that was?
Peter?
Peter, thank you, Peter. All right, so there's a motion on the floor, it's seconded, so I'll do a roll call. I'll start with you, Peter, since you were just speaking.
Yes.
Okay. Ron?
No.
Okay. Christopher Fay?
Yes.
Okay. Joe Morgan?
No.
Okay. Patricia Pecknick?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I've been taking notes and I'm trying to make sure I understand the totality of this motion. So can you please?
Want me to refresh? Okay.
I do. I'm not, there was a lot going on and I'm writing it down, but I don't want to be voting on something if I'm not
Okay, that's
positive
fine.
that it's comprehensive. Yeah.
Okay, the gist of it is basically everything we've asked for, with the exception of the windows on the rear elevation, that where those are being replaced, the applicant be permitted to use the Marvin Integrity series rather than the fully wood framed true divided light type windows, which they would use on the front and both side elevations. Other than that, it's pretty much everything we, oh, and also the window over the front door as a single window.
Could I interject? I believe the rear windows are all new, with the exception that is, there aren't replacements other than actually above the deck of the second floor. I guess there would be one. So everything on that rear elevation is new.
I see. Okay, well that does help clarify things. So it looks like the only replacement window is that one window that's sort of on the upper left of the second floor, towards the east.
Correct.
Okay, and Joe, does that move your vote at all? We're talking about one window.
Yeah, if it's a replacement window, I don't object to new windows being the simulated divided light with the fiberglass exterior.
Right.
I just think that the windows, the replacement windows in the original structure should be restored to their period material and design.
Okay, all right, so including that one window in the back then, sounds like.
One window, okay.
Yeah. All right, so it sounds like you're still a nay or no then. So Patricia, I didn't record your vote yet.
Well, okay, because I don't understand again. So what do you mean except the one window back? So in other
Yes.
words, all the replacement windows will be restored as true divided lights, period material, except what one window on the back?
Okay, if we're looking at the screen right now, it's the second story, left side. You see there's a 6/6 window there? That one window.
No, don't, sorry. I'm sorry, which window is it?
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Andy. Okay, you see the roof deck there, right?
Yeah,
Okay, that one 6/6 window that opens onto that roof deck there on the left. The other windows are already, newer replacement type windows.
oh, I see. So what would be the issue with?
Oh, so what the
that
applicant would like the option of using the Marvin Integrity Series there instead of the full wood frame.
Okay.
I apologize, but I'm going to interject again. I think Dan would be willing on that one 6/6 that is currently a Brosco to do as he's doing with the others, but the new ones that don't exist yet, being in the kitchen and up above in that gable, I believe those are the areas where he was asking the commission if he could go with the simulated.
Okay. Well, thank you for that clarification. That sounds like that was Mr. Curie speaking.
Yes, sorry.
Okay. So Joe, consistent with what you said a minute ago, where replacements of that are part of, not part of any historic section of the building, could be, Marvin Integrity or whatever, but it's the windows that are part of the historic structure and part of that restoration, they would be wood framed 6/6, true divided light, etc. So it sounds like and we would, get this all down in writing too, of course, that condition has been satisfied then. If that's the case, would you be a yes vote?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay. Now we're back to you, Patricia.
Okay. So yeah, so I'm fine with that, and the single window over the front door, and keeping the east elevation kitchen window, but allowing the door added on the west elevation. Okay. So yeah, if that's all part of this, then yes.
Yep, and it is. And I think that only leaves, did everyone vote except me so far? I think so. Joe, Peter, yeah, I think we got everybody. I don't see Malcolm anywhere. So I will vote yes as well. So that leaves, there are 2 no votes, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, wait a minute, I got too many here. I got 7. Did I count somebody twice?
There are not 2 no votes anymore. I don't.
Oh, that's right. I wasn't reading my own notes correctly. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 yeses and 1 no. I know Ron was a no. I'm sorry. I just want to make sure. Christopher Fay, were you a yes vote on that?
I'm a yes.
Okay.
Correct.
All right. So we have 1 nay from Ron. The rest are affirmative. So what I'll do then is, Attorney Mead, is I'll obviously this is a motion that will need to be clarified in writing so that your clients, yourself, everyone is, and the commission is all clear on what exactly we're agreeing to. I think we pretty much have it. It's pretty clear in my mind, and I think we've pretty much got it cleared now. So we will, I'll follow up with you similar to the way we followed up on, after the first meeting 2 weeks ago. Is that acceptable?
That's great. And just so the commission knows where we go from here, this isn't the last you've seen of us. I'm sure you're disappointed in that. We will be going to the planning board now. And then hopefully after they are done, they will make a condition that the Mass Historic and the Planning Historic Commission have to approve final preservation restriction in full. And so we'll come back to you when we have a draft of that document, all the appropriate attachments and the revised plans according to your motion.
Yes, and actually thanks for reminding me about the planning board meeting next week. So what probably will happen is I will share with you, I will draft a report for the planning board so that they know how we've resolved or decided to move forward on this with all that, all the details spelled out. And I believe you're correct that they will want to know all the details and make sure that, you know, whatever is to be specifically preserved is spelled out, and what's, you know, allowable to be changed, you know, and so forth. So we'll do that the best we can. So, and because I know I'll be wanting to get that to them ASAP so they have it in time for their meeting next week.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you all that was kind of a lengthy but important discussion. And so I appreciate all your comments, and appreciate the thought that went into it, especially my Vice Chair, Patricia, and Joe. Thank you, and well, everybody really, everyone for your comments. Let us try to move on now to 39 Harbor Street. As you can see on, thank you, Andy, for displaying the agenda again. This is 39 Harbor Street, I believe, a residence that is on Plum Island. Appears to be quite near the water, actually, from what I saw of the plot plan. This is a typical, now this is not in any DCOD zone or anything like that, but it's a standard straight-ahead demo permit application triggered by a roof line change. They are basically seeking to build straight up on the same footprint of a single-story section of the house to make it two-story. Ms. Mead, I believe you're also representing this client. Did you have anything you'd like to say about it?
Actually, my colleague, Marisa Miller, will be doing this presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Miller?
Hello, good evening, Mr. Chair. This is Marisa Miller here.
Thank you, Marisa.
And I also have, also presenting with me tonight will be Scott Brown, the architect on the project.
Okay.
So I will start by saying, yes, this is a single family residence on Plum Island. It was constructed in 1900. And we are here to seek a roofline change to construct a small second floor addition over the existing first floor footprint. And we'll be adding 164 square feet. Andy, if you could go to the next slide, please. So here I'm just showing the area in which the house is located. And then the next slide, please, Andy. So here we have the site plan, and if you can just zoom in, Andy, and show that second floor addition there, where it's indicated that it is within the same footprint. We're not expanding the footprint, and it's 164 square feet. And can you go to the next slide, Andy? Actually, I'll have you jump to slide 5. I'd like to show photos of the. Okay, so here we have a photo of what exists today, and you can see the first floor there with an entry door. So that second story addition will go over that existing first floor. And then the next slide, please.
And this is Andy. Just folks, I apologize. There's actually a momentary delay when the image is changing, so apologize for that.
Yeah, they're coming through pretty well, Andy. So it hasn't been a problem so far.
So these are just photos from either side of what currently exists, that first floor addition that the second will be constructed over. And then Andy, if you could jump back to slide 4, and this is where I'll have Scott jump in and explain the architectural plans, please.
Well, thank you, Marisa. Scott Brown, the architect for the project. Well, there's not a whole lot to say about this small project. I think what we're doing here is very simple. I was very surprised to learn that this house is 120 years old. And while there may be some old bones there, I don't know where they are. The house has been completely reworked over time. You know, the house even has a concrete block foundation that we could actually see in some of the images that we provided, like slide 5. And I don't think that this type of concrete block was even widely used till way after the turn of the century, probably more like mid-century. So this is like an indication that this house was lifted up and likely rebuilt at some point in time. Can you go to slide 7, Andy? So we're expanding out, you know, over the kitchen. You know, the plan is to match some of the existing details and for the new eave to align with the existing eave. You know, it's a very simple design, and I think one could probably argue that it is an improvement from an aesthetic and even a massing standpoint. In these drawings here, I've bubbled out 2 areas. Some of you might have seen kind of an earlier submission, you know, our early submission. This was sort of a last minute change, and I bubbled out the 2 areas. We are sort of extending out the existing roof out over those entry steps to provide a little bit of a cover for Mr. Collins when he enters the house. So, you know, I don't think there's anything that is historically significant about this house. Again, I think it's a very simple project. You know, the design is in keeping with what is already there, and I certainly hope the commission sees this as a very small request. Thank you.
Okay, and I think your drawings here answered a question I had because I didn't see it on a plan view. Where that door is and the step and the little landing there is sort of the footprint has a little bump out there, but it sounds like the only part you're not building up over that. You're only building up over the footprint of the actual
Correct. Yeah,
house.
those 2 windows, like, you know, those 2 windows that we're seeing there, they're both labeled egress. That's our new addition, which is over the existing kitchen,
Right.
which is going to remain intact.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott.
So, I think this is, as you say, pretty straightforward. Does any member of the commission have a question or seek clarification or comment on anything that we've heard? Mr. Fay, I see a hand up.
Yeah, I'm just, the small, is the large part, so my guess to Scott, is the large part of the house the back of the house?
Well, that would be the front of the house. That's actually on the water side. So if you can maybe pull up, Andy, pull up the site plan. Maybe we could point that out on the site plan. Yeah, so the kitchen is actually, you know, at the front on the street side, and, you know, the main box is on the water side.
Okay.
Main box is the larger portion.
The smaller portion is facing the street. Okay.
Correct, yeah.
All right. That's all. It's just unusual, I think. But
Yeah, it's a bit of
Yeah,
an
it's
odd
a little bit of
orientation.
an unusual setup, and
Yeah.
you know, I'd like to think what we're doing here is, you know, I mentioned, you know, sort of an improvement from a massing standpoint.
Yeah.
Because it does seem so odd that, you know, bumping that up in front, I think, is going to improve the appearance of the house.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and Chris, you can see in this picture we've got here a little, if you look at the lower right corner, I believe that is the street, and I even think I see a fire hydrant there.
Right.
So you can see that either the view from the street is pretty much, you know, you've got the gravel driveway on the side, and the what would be considered kind of the main or front entrance is kind of facing sideways toward that driveway. That in itself not all that unusual, but like the orientation is obviously toward the nice view and that sort of thing.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Any other comment? If not, I would like to make a motion that we determine that the structure is not historically significant. Anyone care to second that or not?
This is Joe. I second that.
Okay, so I'll go around the table here. I'm just going in the order. People are showing up on my list here. And Ron, you happen to be on top again. Your vote, Ron?
So this is on the vote on what now?
On that, determining that 39 Harbor Street, the house is not historically significant.
Okay, yes.
Okay, Peter?
Yes.
Mr. Fay?
Yes, I'll agree.
Okay, Patricia Pecknick?
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
Peter, did I already get you? Yeah, I think I did, right? No.
Yes, you did. I was a yes.
Okay, and I'm vote yes as well. Did I miss anybody? Because it turns out my list keeps reordering itself. So I was trying to go by that list, but it keeps, for some reason, people keep jumping around. I don't understand why. But anyway, it sounds like we are unanimous in that. So we will not need to do a demo plan review or anything. So what that means, I'm sure, Marissa, you're aware of this, and Mr. Scott, that you can, there won't be any impediment to you getting your demolition permit to proceed with your project, at least not from this commission.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, you're quite welcome. Let me make a note here, please. Just give me a minute. Okay, the next item, hang on a second, is 35 Monroe Street. This is actually, on this one, now, will you be speaking to this one, Attorney Mead?
Yes, I am,
You
sir.
are. Okay. I fully appreciate that from the standpoint of the client and the project, it's kind of one project, but from the standpoint of our how we need to proceed legally and procedurally, it's really two separate things that happen to be on the same lot. So I will, give you a chance to make your opening presentation, so to speak. But I just want to be clear to the commission as to what we have here. There's a demolition permit application, which is pretty straightforward and similar to others we've done. That is an application to demolish the accessory structure, AKA the garage, because we estimate it's over 100 years old. So the determination needs to be made on that. Is it historically significant and or not? And if it is, then there's a demo plan review for that and so on. If it's not, or if it's historically significant but not perfectly preserved, then we can move on without further consideration of the garage itself. Now on the house, there's also, as part of this overall project, there is a plan to demolish part of that. And if you've had a chance to look at the materials, I'm sure Ms. Mead will be going over this shortly. There's quite a bit of the structure is structurally deficient and so on. Anyway, they want to demolish over 25% of that. So that triggers the need for a special permit from the Zoning Board of Appeals. And that one of the inputs to that special permit is a historical report from this commission. So very similar to what we've done. There was a house, I believe it was Franklin Street, where we did a similar thing. Gave a report to the ZBA so they could determine whether or not to issue a special permit for that particular project. So what I would like to do is handle the demo, the garage first, and then allow you to, Ms. Mead, to do your overall presentation to introduce the partial delay of the primary structure, because there's a lot more to be said about that. I know you do have, well, I know you have photos of the garage itself as well. So, actually, let me possibly change my mind here. Can you go over those aspects of your presentation that relate to the garage first, so we can kind of take care of that piece of business and then move on to the rest of it?
I will try. You've just thrown me a curveball, so my slides are all out of order now. Yeah. But we'll give it a whirl.
Sorry to inconvenience you. But
that means Andy has to be paying attention too.
That's okay, right? Well, you can keep your first slide as it is and kind of introduce in overall terms the overall project. So because I think it's useful to know the context of why you want to demolish the garage in addition to the condition. So why don't you go ahead and we'll see how we do.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And Lisa Mead, and with me this evening is Eileen Graff, who is the architect on the project. And also with me virtually is Eric and Louise Lingerman, who own the house at 35 Monroe Street. And we are here for the garage demolition, release of the demolition permit on the garage, and for the review for the demolition control overlay district, because as you mentioned, Mr. Chair, we are proposing to remove more than 25% of the existing structure. Interestingly enough, and I think it's important to know this, Louise grew up in this house. Her parents purchased the house in 1965. Mr. Toomey passed away in 2012. Louise and Eric moved into the house shortly after Louise's mom moved to a long-term care facility locally. And they've lived in the house since 2018, are making their home back in Newburyport, having spent a little time in Merrimack. Louise's 2 adult children have moved back into the home as well. And so the proposal includes our later addition where the garage is a new garage with a in-law apartment over it. So the property was improved by single-family residence constructed in around 1850, according to the assessor's records, 1855, according to the district data sheets. There is no Form B for the property. The property is listed as contributing. The house is listed as contributory on the district data sheets. And the district data sheets indicate that the structure was altered in or around 1920. We're going to talk about this a little bit more when we get more into the house, but given the footprint of the house on various insurance maps, some form of the structure and the addition in different places existed in or around the same location back to 1894. And we could talk a little bit about that. So we did have a structural engineer come out and look at both the house and the garage. We are proposing to take down the garage. The garage is falling down and the south wall of the garage has moved off the wooden foundation. The garage doors do not close. Andy, if you go down to the photos, and so here's a street view of all, so this is at the corner of Monroe and Broad, and the garage is kind of tucked back in. But Andy, I'm trying to think about where the garage photos are. So I think you're gonna have to just kind of flip through. So here's an overview of the garage. You can see the back of one of it. The house was added onto in various, you can see it's not atypical. We have the addition, then we had an addition, then we had an addition, and we had the garage. And you can see the garage is leaning in this particular photo. Andy, if you could go down another group, keep going. So here is the garage. You can see the garage door is buckling. You can see the sides bulging out. And the, I'm going to go down to another slide because there are more pictures of the garage. Keep going. And the last one maybe. So those were the only pictures of the garage. But the reality is the garage is, it's moved off its wooden foundation. The doors don't close. The front wall has sunk. All the garage walls and rafters have moved from their original location. The proposal is to remove the garage and then rebuild a garage in that location.
A quick question for clarification, Ms. Mead. In the photos we're looking at here, this group of 4, the lower right is clearly the garage. And the lower left, there's a structure on the left side of that looks like it could be the garage, with kind of a little sheddy thing tacked on the back.
Yeah, it's attached to the back of the garage. Eileen,
oh, okay.
Yeah, it's attached to the back of the garage.
All right, so that is the garage also. Okay.
Yeah, and the garage appears on the 1924. I'm looking in my notes because you've thrown me off, Mr. Chair.
Can I jump in? This is Eileen Graff.
Yes.
This might help you, Lisa. So the garage, if we point to the bottom left drawing and you see the gable, the back side of the garage, that original gable structure shows up on the map in 1894. Then in 1924 is this shed addition on the back. So that's the time frame of the garage and its life, stretching to the back.
Okay, and yeah, you can see it in the picture in the upper left. You can see that it's another good view of the back of the garage with that little shed, like maybe they got a longer car or something, or had make room for the lawnmower behind the car, who knows. Okay, all right, well, that's the garage. So let me pause there for a minute and ask my fellow commissioners if anyone has a concern, question, clarification, comment about whether or not this garage is a suitable candidate for demolition or not. It's very, very quiet. Okay, well, then I'll feel free to make a motion that that this garage is historically significant but not preferably preserved due to rather severe condition issues. Would anyone be willing to second that?
Second.
That sounded like Mr. Ziemba. Thank
Yep.
you, Ron. So let me go around, starting with you, Ron. So would I take it that you'd be willing to vote yes on that?
Yes.
Okay. How about Mr. Morgan?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Pecknick?
Yes.
Okay. Peter McNamee?
Yes.
Who did I miss? Ron? I
Yes.
guess just myself.
Oh,
Did I get Christopher Fay? Yeah, did I get miss? Sorry, Chris. And we
I'll
all
vote-
were talking.
I'll
Sorry,
vote
you.
yes. I'll vote yes.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so we're unanimous in that. All right, so I was hoping that one would be fairly easy to resolve. Let me make a note here. Yes, but not preferably preserved. So there will not be, it will not be necessary to have a public hearing over a demo plan review for that. So with that, we go to the other application, which is the where a historical report has been requested to go along with this request for a permit from the ZBA. So if you want to go back to like towards the top of your slide deck, I'll leave it up to you, Ms. Mead, how you'd like to proceed. Because you can go through pretty much as you wanted to, I guess, at this, and from the beginning, only we can kind of go up, skip over the garage sections since that's been decided.
Great, thank you. Andy, you can go to the My Maps right there so people can understand where it is. So you can see from this photo, and then we provided some earlier assessor's photos, and the vice chair actually found an earlier Sanborn map for us that some form of this footprint, but for the later added sunroom entirely off to the left, has existed over time. From, the district data sheets indicate that the structure was altered in the 1920s. Looks like some form of an addition near or around the same location existed back to 1894. The district data sheets does indicate that it has been altered in various locations on the additions on the back, certainly not the original box of the structure. So presumably, we believe that the alteration occurred to the kitchen, pantry, and second floor bathroom that we're going to talk about. And using the term second floor on that rear addition is being generous. There's a first floor sunroom off of that addition. That footprint of the sunroom is not on the 1924 assessor's map, indicating it was added at some later date. So Louise and Eric proposed to demolish this two-story addition extending from the original structure. Andy, if you could blow that up a little bit, that would be great. Thank you. So the proposal is to demolish the two-story addition extending from the original structure towards the south, as well as the later added first floor sunroom. The existing two-story addition is 2 to 4 feet out of level. The single-story pantry off the kitchen at the southernmost portion of the structure is sinking and does not have a foundation.
2 to 4 feet or inches?
Oh, I'm sorry, 2 to 4 inches. Thank you.
Okay, good.
The pantry from the ceiling to the floor is under 7 feet. While one side of the pantry is on the same plane as the kitchen, the opposite side of the pantry has a 5.5-inch step down demonstrating its sinking structure. Andy, it might be good now to go to those photos because they're pretty clear. So again, we have the photos from the neighborhood, and if you could go to the next set. we get a little closer up. So we're proposing, thank you. The later added sunroom, you can see with the bigger windows, that was added after 1924. Then you have the little shed attached structure off the back with the L. Those are also proposed to be removed. And you can start to see how they have a foundation problem. If you could go to the next set of slides, Andy. And again, we have a larger view, and then next slide, 11. So then you start on the right. This is the engineer that we hired, as well as Eric, started to take photos of some of the things I'm going to describe to you. So the roof over the pantry is not suitable for snow loads, and the window on the adjacent addition sits directly on the roof of the pantry, prohibiting renovation of the roof to support snow loads. If you want to go to the next slide. So you can see here the kitchen wall addition that was discovered when there had to be a repair. It has bricks holding up instead of wood beams. And you can see that in the center line. You can see the kitchen wall foundation that is failing. You can see in the next slide, in the photos on the bottom row, the kitchen floor, you can see the slope in the roof, the step down of the pantry, and the sinking of the doorway to the addition as well. The materials in the pantry are inconsistent and are underperforming, as you can see on these attached photos. Again, these were taken by the engineer and Eric. The kitchen itself is pulling away from the original structure. I've indicated to you where the bricks in the walls have been taking the place of rotted 2x4s over time. And further, it's discovered that the addition was insulated with newspaper. That's actually not a huge surprise, but not good, as you know. Floor joists in the kitchen are undersized and sagging, leading to the measurable belly in the middle of the kitchen floor. All of the doorways connecting to the kitchen are out of level and do not close. One of the doors is at least 2 inches out of level. And I think is there one more slide down of, so here you go. You can see the level that we've put on there. And also you can see the height in the bathroom upstairs and the vent pipe in the hallway to go up to that bathroom. A poorly built unused chimney is located in the kitchen and leaks. Beneath this addition is a brick foundation. The applicants have attempted to insulate the walls of the foundation, but are still receiving significant airflow through the foundation. The brick mortar joists are deteriorating, and a large amount of mortar dust collects annually at the base of the foundation. The building systems for the addition are nearly inaccessible, and access is provided through a small crawl space. I've noted the sewer vent line protruding through the wall into the stairway space that leads to the roof. The second floor space of the addition proves to be the most challenging in its functionality, which is limited. As you can see in this photo, and the photo of the exterior, the addition is lower in roof height than the original structure. This requires a step down from the second floor original to the addition through a door that's 6 feet 2 inches tall. The walls are only 4 feet 11 inches to the ceiling over the tub, as you can see that, with the highest ceiling height at 6'6" under the ridge, which of course the building code requirement would be 7 feet. The later added sunroom is sinking and pulling away from this kitchen addition. The footings to the sunroom have rotted and have no concrete footings beneath the cinder blocks. There are significant issues with the wall foundation between the sunroom and the kitchen. And we have provided an engineer's report that sets forth the problems from an engineering and structural point of view with these additions. And I've already gone through all of those. So what I'd like you to do, Andy, is go to the architectural drawings. The line drawings, well, this is the finished product, so, but if you can go to the line drawings, that would be great. And I'm going to have Eileen talk about what she is proposing to do.
Thank you, Lisa. So Eileen Graff Architects, 2 Liberty Street. So these elevations are a great place to start to help orient. Lisa has already given you the description of the corner. This front elevation, this top drawing, is the elevation that faces Monroe. And so you can see the original hip roof structure there, the 1850s structure. There's a one-story piece to the right, also part of the original structure. So then to the left is the structure that in pretty good depth, Lisa has reviewed the addition to the left that is experiencing some structural challenges. And then of course the pantry is the one-story shed roof to the left of that addition. And then if you slide down to the bottom drawing, you can see the Broad Street view of the hipped roof, the one-story hip as well, part of the original 1850s. Then if the first piece that you see to the right there with the door is the gable end of that addition. And then those large windows are the sunroom, and then a series of fencing and decking that then attach to the garage. And then we could slide to the next.
Everything looks pretty straight there.
So this is the view. If you had, is the backside from Monroe. And so what this actually shows, again, the hip roof helps orient you on the original structure. Then to the right of that is that addition. What I want to point out in this addition is if you look at the edge between, see the double window on the first floor level there on the original structure, and then you see the corner board of the addition. If you look just about 3-4 feet to the right of that is a dash line. What I want to point out is that from that dash line to the corner board, that piece was yet another addition. While the first edition, I'll say in the 1894 map shows up from that dash line to the right, this dash line to the left, this piece that's sort of glommed on, that shows up in the 1924 map. So, so even though we see these forms as addition after addition after addition, there's even some buried in there. So what we feel is sort of a unfortunate addition there is that with this 3-foot addition, we lose the corner of the original structure by them glomming on more of this gable roofed addition.
Yeah, looks like that dotted line looks like it's where the original structure was. Because you could see it lines up with the roof line above.
Correct. That's correct. And it makes for really strange conditions on the interior as well, with that sort of a glommed on corner there. And then the bottom drawing here, as we've seen in photographs, a great assembly showing the evolution of all these additions. But I want to pause on that bottom one just to help explain. As we've seen in some of the photographs, I want to give a sense of scale to this property, and starting with the original hip roof structure. So it's modest in heights. You know, the first floor is 7'6.5". The second floor ceiling heights are 7'4.5". So if you look to the second floor 6/6 windows of the original, I want to just sort of point out that the sill of those windows is only 16 inches off the floor, and with the head height of those windows at 5'7". And to give reference, you know, the modern day typical house is built with head heights of 6'8". So it's a good foot lower than a typical modern day building. And so if you travel to the left and you're inside, and as Lisa mentioned already, when you're trying to get from the original structure to this addition, the doorway, because as you can see, the gable roof there is lower in eave height than the original structure. You can imagine sort of ducking. It's only 6'2" of a doorway, where you then are stepping down into a room that at the highest point is only 6'5", and then and then the wall heights, 4 foot, I believe 4'10", 4'11" on the eave end. So it's really this sort of compressed space that makes it pretty challenging to have as a usable room. We showed the photograph of the tub. It's good it's a tub because you have to stay low in these shorter lines. And again, to give you reference, those windows that you're looking at in the gable end there, the sill height of that is 6 inches off the floor. And then the head height of that is only, 4'6" to the top of those windows. So again, trying to give you a sense of this compressed low space, it ends up being a challenge to having this space updated to help support, sort of the original house, and again, bring it up to sort of modern day living. While the footprint below on the first floor could possibly be managed and blended into the first floor functioning in floor plan, it's the second floor of this space that we felt was challenging any kind of functionality and support of the second floor needs. So hopefully this gives a good review of how these structures relate to each other in scale from the interior point of view. When we transition to how can we amend this? How can we improve on this? Actually, Andy, if you just stay on the existing just for another moment, that would be great. The idea was, we thought about reusing the footprint, and then could we raise the roof? And we certainly we could come before you to just simply raise the roof and keep the walls. But if you remember on that above drawing, above this one, that corner where they collide, and what does that look like when you have roofs colliding the way it is if the eaves were to align? Again, I would have to meet the eave height because already we're at a low ceiling height. So the idea of what these roofs would look like if it were a full 2 stories, we had concerns of the aesthetics of that. And then on top of that, the idea of investing and putting efforts into an upper level when yet the foundation has less to be desired, not just the framing, but also the foundation. So that's when we decided that maybe the efforts should be placed somewhere else, and that this is a really tough salvage. And so we are proposing that we are going to move this living space to the back of the original structure. So now if we could switch to a proposed drawing, that will help explain in elevation.
Well, while Andy is switching, Marissa, how's the foundation under the old part of the house, the original part? Is that more or less sound?
That's sound, yes. Okay. We have no issues with the original, including that 1-story piece to the right of it. We have no, they love the original house, so we have no problems there. So here you can see that original addition is removed, and what you could see to replace it is both the garage and above the garage is the in-law suite, and then in front of that is a screen porch that connects the two. What I want to point out in this elevation is that it's a little deceptive in a line drawing in 2D, the planes in which these are all sitting. What I think we do have another rendering that can help demonstrate this, but what I want to call out is the face of the original house actually sits 25 feet in front of this screen porch that you see. The screen porch essentially sits on the back line of the original structure. Then behind that, another 16.5 feet is the gable end of the garage beyond. So really 42 feet behind the original face is the proposed garage. And then if we could slide to the next drawing. Thank you. This helps describe the addition on the back side. So here you can see the original hip structure. And what we're proposing is with the added footprint, it goes out 12'6" from the original structure. And part of that is 1 story, as you could see. You could see to the rear of the original 2-story. And then there's an addition of the 2-story. We've stepped in width. It's the 2nd story is actually narrower than the original structure. So you see a change in the ridge height, and you see and respect the corner of the original building. So that was important to us, that we are not burying, we're actually exposing and celebrating the original structure there. And then to the right of that, you can see again pushed back and in more faded lines there is the garage set beyond, and then above that is the in-law suite. And then on the next drawing, there we go. So this is the rear of the structure, so opposite the Monroe face. So here you can also see that step in width of the from the original hip roof on the 2nd story there. And then in front of that, in this garage plane, is the gable for the garage and the in-law. And then below that, great. And so this is opposite the Broad Street facade. And here, once again, the original structure of the hip, and then traveling back 25 feet from the front face is the beginning of the screen porch. And then the garage and in-law structure on the back. And while we've moved the living space towards the Broad Street side, the feeling, what it does for both Louise and Eric is that it ends up allowing them to put the living space on a side that is more public, in the sense that it allowed them then to free up the yard. And as you can see, they put the deck there. That's the space that they enjoy. It has the most privacy. It's quieter on the Monroe side. It's the brighter eastern southern light. So they enjoy their coffee there in the morning. And they really, by having the structure that was there, they saw a great opportunity by shifting it to the rear of the original building so that they can expose more of that space for the more private and less exposed to Broad Street, where you couldn't really create privacy with the garage and driveway off that side. So they saw this as a huge improvement to how they could live. And then Andy, if you scroll probably past the photos is a rendering to help convey the addition.
That's from the last one, Andy. Thank you.
Thank you. So seen from Monroe, looking up towards the corner of Broad, and you can see the original hip roof structure, and there's a pretty good hedge privet there, and they intend to keep that. They love the way it gives them the privacy. But this, I think, rendering helps demonstrate better where the garage sits in relation to the original house. And also you could see the break in the roof line from the addition to the original house, and then as well as how far back the screen porch is. And that, I believe, covers everything, but I'm happy to, well, I can touch on materials. Sorry, I forgot that. The existing house has shingles, which they actually love. So we have proposed that to continue elsewhere. The windows are 6/6. I can't say that they're historic. They've been replaced, and they are vinyl windows. But we would like to maintain the divisions and style. So we are also proposing 6/6 windows on the addition. And at that, I can conclude my architectural review of it, but I'll let Lisa take the lead back.
Okay. So let me make one quick observation here just to clarify something. This rendering, I think, shows it up reasonably well. So looking at the structure, right in the middle, you have the roof deck, and that is above the screened-in porch, correct?
That's correct.
All right. So to the if you were on that deck facing the same way this rendering is, you know, as if you were the person who drew this, but somehow zoomed up to the roof deck there. To your right is the addition to the main house, which is set in a little bit here at this corner, and I believe it was also jogs in on the opposite side as well. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, and the ridge line is also slightly lower, if I recall.
That's correct.
The elevation. Okay, and then and it's attached to this garage slash living, you know, apartment structure on the left, which is, you know, sizable. As a historical commission, you know, you can the ZBA, I'm sure, will have, you know, be looking at things like you know, lot coverage and setbacks and all that stuff, but we're more concerned with other things here. But before we get into that, Ms. Mead, did you want to take back the microphone, so to speak, to say anything else, or not?
No, I think that I just, you know, the recommendation essentially from the commission, according to the ordinance, is that the later added portions of the structure that we're asking to be demolished are of no reasonable use, and the rehabilitation is not reasonably feasible. And I think that we have provided, for the record, information related to that. And we'd love to hear what your comments are.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And for my fellow commissioners, as I believe I would be correctly kind of outlining our task here as, you know, we have to provide our report / recommendations. It's officially known as a historical report to the Zoning Board of Appeals, which is the, they have the authority to approve this project or not, or require changes, or whatever it is they decide they want to do. So there's two things, you know, we can look at those parts of the structure that are to be demolished. And as Ms. Mead just said, you know, determine whether we feel that it's the loss of those parts of the structure would result in a adverse impact on the historical nature or not. And we can also include comments to the zoning board on the overall plan if we desire, if we have concerns over, you know, the size of the addition and with respect to the additional structure, whatever, you know, they can, you know, take those comments and do with them whatever they wish. It's I think Ms. Mead is correct in that the primary thing is whether the demolition would result in a loss of important historical features that are not so badly deteriorated that they can't be saved. That's our primary function. And then additionally, since we are doing this report, I think we're at liberty to make other comments as we see fit. I think they would mainly be along the lines of, do we have any concerns about the overall impact on the very local environs of this particular house and its neighbors and so on? Given what's there now, do we see any, you know, an overall adverse impact or not, and so on? I hope I haven't made things muddier by that little preface. So that's enough from me. My fellow commissioners, does anyone have anything to say? See, everyone except Ron is muted. I don't see any hands raised. Would anyone like to ask a question or make a comment? Yes, Ms. Pecknick, I see your hand.
Are you asking for comments on whether those parts of the addition that, as documented, are not salvageable? Are we just voting on that, or are you asking for general comments overall about the house and the plan?
Well, sort of both. We have to, it's not our purview to approve or disapprove or, you know, delay a permit or anything like that, but we what we'll be generating is a historical report similar to what we've done in the past. And so the main thing that that report will need to say is whether there'll be any loss of important historic fabric due to the proposed demolition. It can also extend to some of the things you may be referring to, you know, more the overall thing, given, let's say, we don't think that the things that are being demolished would result, perhaps we would say that that's not going to be a loss of important and significant historical fabric, or it's too far gone already, whatever. And we could also, the comments could also include thoughts on what's proposed to be built, whether we think it's, you know, appropriate to, or in what's the word I'm looking for, you know, harmonious with what's already there or not, that sort of thing. So it's kind of both. I hope
Okay,
I've answered your question.
I'll just say things to address all my concerns then.
Okay.
So this house is right on the margin of that Ocean Mills Historic District, which has its own Form A, and sort of describes the way that those few blocks developed when the textile mill was built in 1845 and the mill workers needed homes. So there are a lot of these very modest Greek Revival and Victorian houses in between, you know, the Ocean Mills District, sort of in between, like heading toward Toll, silversmiths and all that. And it's, you know, working, you know, middle class houses sandwiched between, you know, the fancy houses on High Street and the fancy houses in the shipbuilding district, like the one that we had earlier. And it's a very characteristic house of that type. It's not as small as the ones on Ocean and Carter, but it's very modest. And so even though it's not architecturally distinctive, I think, you know, preservation stopped being about just the elite houses a long time ago. So, and I like this house a lot. It's on a high visibility corner lot. I'm really happy that they're gonna shingle the addition to match. I did find the 1894 Sanborn Map because I was curious. I don't know if you want to pull that up or not, Andy. It's not really a big deal, but it shows, as I think Ms. Graff was saying, you know, there were various editions. It's sort of like got the Lego treatment. Here's an edition, and yeah. So the 1894 Sanborn Map shows that, you know, there's the 1-story edition, and that's a 1.5-story edition on the other side, and maybe the garage. And what's interesting to me about that is that the current view of the house from Monroe Street in the front is like it was in 1894, you know, this in terms of the scale of the additions. I can't say anything about the George Walker Essex County maps without being hypocritical, but yeah, you could look at those too, and they show some stuff. I don't really like them as evidence, but I think the applicant did a great job demonstrating that there is really no use or no way to rehabilitate or restore these sections that have suffered for so long. And I can't say that I think that that sort of demo work would compromise, you know, the historic assets of the neighborhood, whatever. I do think the addition needs to be subordinate and not compete in size or scale. It seems like I understand the comments about the setback, but I'm afraid it's going to loom very large, look very intrusive. On the Broad Street side, I've concerns about the dormer on Broad Street, and that it's just too big and massing in height, and that it might not fit in with the context buildings. The deck on Monroe Street, I understand it's set back, but again, it's a high visibility lot. So those are all of my thoughts, and I would like to hear from other people on the commission about all that and whatever else is on their minds.
Okay. Thank you, Patricia. And Chris, I see your hand up, but I had a quick question before, and then I'll recognize you, Chris. Andy, could you go back to that that last map we were looking at? I am sorry, I don't know what page it was. Hopefully you remember what page you were on. You had that map that you zoomed in on. Yes, there you go, thank you. Does anyone know what the significance of the original house has? There's like a circle on that and a circle on the little part on the left, whereas the addition has little X's and the garage is a little X. Does anyone know what those mean?
I have no idea.
I can't remember the symbols. I used to know if it was, I know the doors, the X's might be doors. I can't remember. It's like 1 story, 2 story, 1.5, and then there's all kinds of, the D is dwelling. I'm sorry, I can't remember the.
Okay.
I think
Yeah,
it's like access for the firemen so they could know where to get in.
Okay.
So maybe the X's are the doors. I'm not sure.
Okay. And yeah, I think the 2 and the 1.5 must certainly reflect the stories because, and it's very consistent with what Ms. Graff showed us with the the views and the elevations and all that, that addition, I have no idea why they made it this 1.5 story. Maybe that half story was just an attic at the time that they tried to make livable. But that's purely a guess at my point. Okay, thank you very much. Chris, what did you like to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in, especially on the roof deck, not surprisingly. I'm not in favor of the roof deck. I wasn't really in favor of the roof deck on the one we talked about earlier this evening, but I know it's in the back. But this is clearly visible from, from a very popular street, walking up and down the street on a regular basis. There's a lot of foot traffic right now under our circumstances. And I can appreciate the work that's gone into this. I can appreciate wanting to have coffee in the sunlight. I think Patricia put it well. If this is a working person's home, I think it has to be recognized as such. And not to be glib, but no time for morning coffee if you're headed off to the mill. So I just feel like I think we have to be consistent with that, and we've been consistent with roof decks. With one notable exception recently. So I just want to strongly urge and the screen and porch as well, I would say. So a modern sort of, I don't know what you'd call it, 60s incarnation, maybe earlier, I don't know, but that's what it seems like to me. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Anyone else have a comment or a question from the commission? And your hand is still up, by the way, Chris. Well, I'm not hearing any. Because I was hoping and I've been taking notes, Patricia, on your comments, and I noted yours, Chris, as well. So I will. What needs to happen is I need to draft a historical report to the Zoning Board of Appeals. So what I'm hearing from the commission, and I'd like your feedback on this to make sure I'm not projecting or reading into things too much, is that the sense I have is that the loss of the areas which are proposed for demolition would not result in a lamentable loss of historically significant material, largely due to well, 2 reasons, really. In large part due to the condition, but also due to the fact that a lot of those were later added things that were re-added onto, modified, changed, whatever. I did do a walk by the house myself the other morning. It was early on. I was up early for some unknown reason. Noticed your cat lounging on your picnic table on the side there. But anyway, even though it's classified as, quote, Italian, with the shingling, Italian, it wouldn't have had the shingling in all likelihood. So it's the main thing that's preserved is kind of what Patricia talked about, and Chris to a certain extent, the overall size and shape and form of it is that, typical working class kind of dwelling. So the other comment that I think the report would need to state is that we have, as a commission, Chris is quite correct, on those areas that are highly visible to the public and in districts and regions and structures that are, 19th century and older, that, roof decks typically, that are kind of incongruent and therefore discouraged. And I'll be happy to include those comments in the report, as well as some concerns about the size. I think there's not, the ZBA will have to decide about the size. I think there's only so small you can make it and still have a workable, or a livable, I should say, living quarters above for the, it's called an in-law apartment still traditionally, but it's really, I think they're calling it now an accessory residence. I forget the exact terminology because it's not necessarily, it used to be, you know, where you talk to grandma or whatever, but now it could be that, could be children of the residents moving back home, could be almost anything, but it does, I think the zoning still does require it to be a relative of
Right.
the owners.
Yeah.
Yeah, did you, I'm sorry, were you trying to interject something there? Was that Ms. Meets?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on that. So Newburyport hasn't changed the zoning yet, although prior to the COVID situation, obviously people were working very diligently on that and to change the terminology and how it works. But under the Newburyport zoning, it's an in-law, and it is required to have a relative in there, and we will need another special permit from the zoning board on that. And I did just want to add one other thing relative to the roof deck. Of course, we're here before the commission for you to determine that there's essentially no reasonable use, or that the rehabilitation of that particular thing that we're asking to remove is not reasonably feasible, which I think it sounds to me like everybody's pretty much in agreement on. I've heard, I've attended most of your last meetings, and I've certainly heard the comments from the commission relative to roof decks. However, the city has no ordinance or policy or regulation relative to design review and roof decks. And I certainly hear what your comments are, but there is no basis upon which a person in the city of Newburyport who is a resident would be advised in advance that roof decks are not okay. So this isn't, nobody's putting preservation restriction on this house. And I just want to point that out, that should the commission want to have that adopted similar to the design techniques for dormers, that the commission ought to have the city council, who are the policymakers, adopt an ordinance relative to the design and or absence of roof decks.
Okay, well, your comment is noted. I accept that that what you said is true about there not being anything encoded into any ordinance about that. Notwithstanding what Mr. Fay said is also, you know, true about what we've been recommending as part of our design reviews and so forth. So,
design review is my point.
Pardon me?
The function of the commission at this moment is not design review.
Mm-hmm.
The function of the commission at this moment is to make a determination to recommend or not relative to the removal of this addition that's being proposed to be removed to the city council. We do not have design review.
Okay, well, actually we'll have a further discussion slightly later in this meeting about how far our purview extends. My understanding is that what you said is basically correct just now, but it doesn't mean that our report can't include commentary, which the ZBA is free to ignore or take into consideration as far as, you know, and other things we might wish to opine on, as far as if they're things that relate to the historical significance of the structure and its locale. Okay, so I think I have enough to do the historical report. So before I do the final closeout, any last comments from anyone on the commission before we tackle the next item? I'm not seeing hands and hearing silence, so I'll take that as a no, and we can proceed. That was the last item as far as those kinds of hearings. We have some other important items on the agenda, though. One is there was a letter received in relation to the preservation restriction for Central Congregational Church for the sake of time, it's getting late, and I want to have as much time as possible for our review of the NHE powers and duties. So I'll just be very brief about this. The letter was from Mass Historical Commission to Central about, well, over a year ago, I believe a PR was sent to Mass Historical Commission. It was rejected and sent back with some fairly extensive and significant changes. I have not seen the revised version of that PR. So I'm waiting for that to come in so I can take a look at it to see what the changes are. And then, here's the letter. It just shows, in this particular letter, it's saying how that the Mass Historic has reviewed the revised preservation restriction, and it seems to be okay with them. There were a couple of, in the case of this letter, some fairly minor things, including some which appear to be Mass Historical's errors, not even errors on the part of either the whoever drafted the restriction or whatever. So looks like they're satisfied with this point. I think that given the nature of the changes and the history of this whole thing, I'd like to see it again. Doesn't necessarily mean we need to have a formal review. I can determine that once we've seen the actual updated PR. So not really much more to say about that at this point, other than that the heads up that we will take a quick look at that just to make sure everything is in order. It can be kind of reprocessed in the revised form for approval at the city level and at the Mass Historic level. Does anyone have a question on that? If not, we can go on to a part of the agenda that I'm very anxious to get to. Andy, are our city councilors, Mr. Eigenman and Ms. Shand, have they joined us?
Yes, Councilor Shand is here. I believe Councilor Eigenman is joining us momentarily. And I will pull up those slides if you'd like.
Okay, so while Andy's doing that, did anyone have a question about the letter from Mass Historic Commission? Okay, we'll get back to this once we get a chance to review it, and we'll let everyone take a look at it, and we'll just make sure it's everything's cool, as they say.
Glenn, I don't know if Councilor Eigenman has just joined us. I don't know if you wanted to give just a quick introduction from your perspective of what we're hoping to do here. I know Councilor Eigenman will, and I'm sure I'll speak to that as well.
Yeah, I'm assuming that he probably will. So I can be very, very brief because it is getting late, and I know I'm so appreciative of the councilors joining us and the work that went into putting this together on the part of both Mr. Eigenman, Councilor Heather Shand. Very happy to have you on board. I'm very grateful for doing this. Particularly for our newest members, Joe Morgan and Patrick McNamee, with whom I spoke earlier, and I know he's got a number of questions. We're very, very grateful for this overview, and we think it'll be really helpful. So I'll shut up now and I'll let you guys do your presentation.
Thank you. Actually, and again, this is Andy. I just wanted to note as well, I would offer if Jennifer Blanchet, who's our zoning administrator and is here, or Caitlin Sullivan, our staff planner, if either of those folks want to weigh in with anything on as the slides, we go through the slides, that might be helpful. There's a lot of good pointers in there. And then I think I mentioned previously, it might be good to just touch base on some of the key elements of a preservation restriction towards the end of these slides.
Okay, do you want me to go ahead and present?
Yes,
sure,
please do, Jared.
Yeah, if you could, okay, so the point of this handbook, it's 38 slides, so it's not 38 pages, it's just slides, not that bad. But the point is to give you in one document everything. It's a complex set of duties that the commission has. So I just want to, you can read the actual details later. It's late. You've been at work for a while. But first, there are several different ordinances that you have to be aware of. You don't need to memorize all of them. That's not your responsibility. You just need to be aware of them. So the first is under Chapter 2 of the City Code. There is, and we've just passed with Councillor Shan's help, clarification of all the duties of the Historical Commission. State law already sets out what those duties are, but oftentimes people don't read the state law or don't know where to find it. So we've imported it into the city code. So there it is, and you can just search it. The next item is in the city code is the demolition delay ordinance. It's under an Article 10, Roman numeral 10, called building demolition. Then state law allows something called formation of a local historic district, which is probably the most powerful regulatory scheme, but we only have one of them in Newburyport, and that's the Fruit Street Historic District. And the irony of these local historic districts is that usually once they're formed, your commission hands it off to the district commission. So you don't have a direct role at Fruit Street. Then there are two zoning ordinances, and I'll get to that. Newburyport is unusual for various reasons. And so we have a downtown overlay district that the commission plays an important role in, and a demolition control district. Next slide.
Councilor Ackerman, I don't know if you want me to speak to this or if you wanted to. I'm happy either way.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I threw in these slides or these graphics that, again, Councilor Ackerman mentioned this is all available electronically, and I did put a date on these slides, so I figured we might improve this or adapt this over time for future commissioners. But this is just meant to illustrate geographically where the jurisdictional areas are. So you have the Fruit Street Local Historic District is really a relatively small area. Right in there. Obviously, the National Register District is this area here, but doesn't have that local ordinance with the same powers. Then you have the Downtown Overlay District, so that's concentrated right in the downtown. And then the rest of the National Register District is absorbed into the Demolition Control Overlay District, and that's basically the residential area for the most part. And again, just the distinction there is that the Downtown Overlay District, the planning board is the permit granting authority for those special permits. They take an advisory opinion from the Historical Commission. In the Demolition Control Overlay District, outside of that, the larger area, it's the Zoning Board of Appeals that issues permits and, again, listens to an advisory opinion from the Historical Commission. And I know Councilor Ackerman has slides to elaborate on some of those details. And then there is the rest of Newburyport. So everything outside of that, which falls to the Historic Commission in terms of the demolition delay.
Any quick, sorry to interrupt the flow here, but just to help make this concrete. So tonight we had one of the one on Plum Island was that kind of the rest of Newburyport, good example of that. We didn't have any of the Downtown Overlay District, but we had one not too long ago with the windows at the Market Square. You might recall that. And there's also one coming up with the State Street Institution for Savings Bank. Those are both in the DOD. So we'll have examples of those. And the other two, the Merrimack Street and the Monroe and Broad Street house we talked about tonight, those were in the Demolition Control Overlay District. In one case, it was a report to the ZBA because it was over 25%. In the other case, it was, a demo delay, but I'll stop there because I'm sure you'll have, it's where it gets complicated. Oh, one quick question. Is the Newburyport Historic District, is that still a thing or does that expired or what?
So originally in the early 70s, they formed the first National Historic District down by the waterfront. And then the one that we're operating under now, which is still on the National Register and the State Register, the so-called Newburyport Historic District, was done in the early 80s, and it's still in effect.
Okay.
But it doesn't have regulatory power. It only rears its head when the federal government or the state government has to approve a project or give money. And then they do an historic review based on the buildings in that district. But because all that work was done almost 40 years ago, all of the buildings were inventoried, whether they were contributory to the historic district or not. We didn't reinvent the wheel. We just incorporate that work by reference.
Okay. Thank you, Jared.
So this slide is about the Fruit Street District. Councilor Agam, I don't know if you wanted to pick up here, but
yeah, I'll go fast, and then people can answer questions. I know 38 slides is a lot. So the Fruit Street District, as I said, this is the only bona fide local historic district. There is a scheme under Massachusetts general laws for these districts. This was formed about 13 years ago. There's a commission, a standalone commission that administers it. Obviously, it's very small. The role that's retained by your commission is if a preservation restriction, which is a contract, essentially, a real estate right, you would hold that.
Mhm.
That's it for Fruit Street. Yeah.
Okay.
If you have questions, I can answer them.
Is that Cushing House Museum in that? Looked like it is on the
It
corner
is.
there.
Yeah, the Cushing House is in it. So it's not actually a standalone landmark. We don't regulate any buildings in Newburyport as standalone landmarks, although we think of them that way. It's contributory to the district.
Okay.
So this is the downtown overlay district. This was the innovation that we came up with 6 years ago. And the reason why we needed to do it is they did try to form a local historic district in the early 70s when they were doing urban renewal, and it failed. And instead, the only protections we had for all of the 1807 buildings on State Street and Market Square and so on were deed restrictions because the Newburyport Redevelopment Authority condemned all of the property by eminent domain and then placed deed restrictions. They had a 40-year sunset, which expired in 2005. So in between 2005 and 2014, there were no controls on these buildings for demolition or alteration. You could do whatever you wanted with them. That was a dangerous time. We lucked out a little bit because there was a recession in there. So some of the buildings that would have been torn down, I think, were saved by economics. And the key in this district is, again, there was another effort to start a local historic district maybe 8 years ago, which again failed. And so the compromise was, okay, you don't like local historic districts, people of Newburyport, so you seem to have more trust in our planning board, and we anointed them to be the permit reviewing authority. However, they need the commission's expertise. So your commission, that's that second little bullet point, that's a key role. And a great example would be the windows on the Market Square building, the new Vera Restaurante. Again, there used to be deed restrictions. They've been gone for 15 years. So all of the restoration work that was done around 1975 was imperiled. And if it hadn't been for the commission advising the planning board on what should be done with those windows, they would not have known what to do. And then, of course, everywhere you can hold restrictions. Okay, the next bit of compromise at the same time was essentially there was no political will to have local historic districts outside of downtown. And there isn't really any political will still, 6 years later, to do design review outside of downtown, which is very odd considering how beautiful some of our neighborhoods are. So the compromise was, all right, we can all agree that if there's a building that is still standing and solid, it should not be torn down. So if they were inventoried back in that 1982 or so National Historic District that I talked about, we incorporate that by reference in the so-called Demo Control Overlay District. And the Zoning Board of Appeal cannot approve demolition of one of these buildings, that is more than 25% of its exterior walls, unless they make special findings. And again, the advisory report from your commission is absolutely vital for the zoning board to know essentially right from wrong. So the rest of the report is where what we had in 2014 before the advent of these new ideas, and that is demo delay. Demo delay is a bizarre law. It's actually not authorized under any state law. I don't know who invented it, but it's fairly clever, and you've worked with it, of course. Any building over a certain age, in Newburyport we use 75 years and 100 years for accessory. Before the demolition can proceed, it gets referred to you, and you decide whether the building needs to be studied as significant, and so on. We'll get back to that. Okay, so demolition delay. This is a city ordinance, doesn't have any backup by state law, but you review anything that's an historically significant structure. You can read the definitions at your leisure, but the key is to understand what demolition is. It's defined very broadly. So for a building that isn't subject to all these other regulations, the sort of generic demo delay, these are all the things you have to look at, and it includes changes in roof pitch. That was an important clarification because some real harm can be done to these buildings by messing with the roof, even if you're not, pulling it, tearing it down altogether. And then the exceptions are fairly obvious: antennas, electrical equipment, things also that are not significant to the building can be taken off. Now, one thing you may not realize is that you can designate buildings as historically significant. There's that default rule of 75 years and 100 years, but these are the criteria you could use to be proactive and designate buildings for significance. Now, to demolish. So someone has a building, it's not downtown, it's not subject to the DCOD, Demolition Control Overlay District, so Plum Island. So you're out on Plum Island, building's over 75 years. They have to submit an application to you with all of these 6 items. And essentially an application is not complete unless you have all 6, because you can't do your job. So you really shouldn't feel pressured with an applicant. If they haven't given you all 6 of these things, you don't have, the time period hasn't started yet. They're fairly obvious of what you need to understand the significance of the building and what the project entails.
And I would also add to that Caitlin and Jennifer and I, we usually try to identify those things, and Diane in our office when applications come in. But if anything is missed for any reason and you notice an oversight, please advise us. We certainly want to stay on top of those things and make it clear to applicants that the clock is not ticking and their applications are incomplete unless they provide all those things like Councilor Eigenman said.
Yeah, it is a team effort. That's an excellent point, because we're all human. So I mean, staff may miss something. Keep your eyes open.
Yeah, and I'd say 2 items on that list, Councilor, that I typically see missing are like the actual structural engineer report. Like, we had photographs this evening and so forth, and they were pretty convincing. I don't think there was any real doubt about the structural deficiencies that were claimed, but I didn't see an actual report from an actual engineer, although supposedly one was done. But the list of all permits, I can't recall ever having seen that. Sometimes they're mentioned in passing, but that that would be useful.
I believe that.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
I believe that the office considers my zoning determination, that list of permits required.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, where you check the boxes like, upward extension of a variance and all that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, special permit for nonconformities as well as demo delay.
Right.
That is essentially a list of the permits required for the project.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Jennifer.
Okay, so here's where it gets complex. And this ordinance was written, I think, before most or all of us were around. But there's a 30-day clock once the application is complete. So when it says receipt, it's receipt of a complete application. The first task is, was the building actually historically significant? Technically, this presentation where the applicant comes in and can argue that it's not historically significant is not the public hearing. A public hearing in Massachusetts means is formal. You have to allow any member of the public to testify, whereas a public meeting is run more casually and speakers are at the discretion of the chair. The purpose of this is to give notice. That's the second bullet point, to the building commissioner. So you have to, quickly decide, all right, we got an application. It is significant. The applicant says it's not significant. We disagree. And then you get notice, and staff, of course, will help you. to write the building commissioner and put him or her on notice that he can't proceed with any demolition permits. That's what the code says, until you're done with your review. Okay, then here's the public hearing. The public hearing is the big show. So within 30 days to receive the application, and Jennifer helped me with this, that in practice, what you guys do is you actually hold it together. So you can do it in one night, that's up to you. But you do have to post notice, you have to mail notice, abutters to abutters, and that's where Diane Boisvert helps out. That has to be done properly. Those are legal requirements. The key really is, again, Secretary of the Interior standards. That's the mantra that you're going to see throughout this presentation. That's what you should be referencing when you're trying to figure out what's right and what's wrong. And we already discussed what a hearing is. Okay, now what's the result? So the result is you're supposed to give a report. So a written report after the hearing and within 60 days of the a demolition plan filing. So you get basically 2 months. And you tell the building commissioner, can he issue the building permit or can he not? Because there's deemed approval, which is sort of a Massachusetts thing, you snooze, you lose. You always need to file a report to protect, you just assume that. And then in the report, those are, a lot of it is sort of common sense, what you would think you would put in it. But the key is it preferably preserved? That's the jargon people use. Is the building preferably preserved rather than demolished? By the way, you can interrupt me anytime and ask questions. I'm going fast because I don't want to keep you too late at night.
Yep, that's fine, Jared. Go ahead.
Okay. So if the structure is preferably preserved, then the building commissioner is barred by law. No demolition permit can issue for 12 months. The way I look at it is the builder goes into the penalty box for 12 months. And it starts when the report is filed. If the structure is not preferably preserved, you can make that determination. There's no point in putting the builder in the penalty box. And then you've done your review and you tell the building commissioner, go ahead and issue demolition permits. You can terminate it early. This, I think, is a key thing. So the applicant usually has to initiate this. They can submit an amended demolition plan. It's supposed to be during a regular commission hearing, so you should not be holding special meetings. Which you don't need to bend over backwards, just your normal procedure. You don't have to hold a new hearing. You already held a public hearing for public testimony. However, material changes gives you the option to hold public hearing because you may want to get input from the public, especially neighbors. Now, in order to early, cut the 12 months off early, you have to be satisfied of either of these two things. One, there's a bona fide, reasonable, and unsuccessful effort to find a buyer. So the concept, whoever it was that invented demolition delay in Massachusetts was, well, we'll find a buyer who loves the house and won't demolish it. Doesn't usually work that way, but that's the concept. The way that I think is more common is that the applicant doesn't want to wait 12 months, and so they accept conditions. And this is where the last bullet point is absolutely vital. Contrary to what some may think, there's no limitation in the code of what those conditions will be. The demolition delay ordinance is written in such a way that you essentially have the leverage to say, look, if you don't agree to our conditions for preserving this building, you can't do anything for 12 months. That's it. I mean, it's all you have. So your conditions can relate to any aspect of the structure. It's not just some specific aspect that was subject to the application.
Yeah, and we had, this is Glenn again, so tonight we had an example of where we kind of went through that process. We imposed a 12-month demolition delay on the Merrimack Street property. We told them, we had an initial set of, I don't know what to call them, suggestions, demands, whatever you want to call them. They came back, they were like 80% of the way there. Tonight, I think we got them a little bit closer. The only thing I would add, Jared, to what you just said is that even though, yes, we can, and I'm glad you're clarifying this, that it's not restricted to some specific thing like only that particular part of the roof they're altering or whatever. That's really important to know. The only thing I would say though is that whatever we do suggest, is got to be, legally defensible in terms of if we're imposing restrictions or requiring changes, they should be consistent with those guidelines from the Department of Interior. In other words, they shouldn't be arbitrary. Is basically what it boils
Correct.
down
Yeah,
to.
yeah. That's a good point. I mean, sorry, I kind of skipped ahead. I mean, unlike in business and in private life, where being arbitrary for some people is a way of life, in government, you can never act arbitrarily. You cannot say, okay, we'll eliminate the 12-month delay if you walk my dog every week. You can't do that ever. So yes, go by the Secretary of Interior standard, something reasonable. Always have to be reasonable in government. Okay, so after the delay,
Jared, can I interject one thing?
Yes, please.
If you, on the previous slide where you say that they may hold a new public hearing, I think the practice is that the commission is accustomed to continuing, and customarily people want to keep the process moving. But if there is a gap, that's when you might want to re-advertise it if they came back with something that was so different.
Okay, now that reminds me, that's a good point, because I know in practice from talking to staff and to Glenn, that rather than imposing the delay, say on day 1, and then having the developer come back on day 10, for to start over, that I hear you. You keep it open, and it's sort of an iterative process of, here are our suggestions. Can you come around to them, and we won't have to impose the delay. So
but only after imposing the delay is the point.
Yeah.
I think.
I'm sorry. We can lift the delay quickly if you would please listen to our conditions. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and thanks, Jennifer. That's what I tried to do correctly with this Merrimack Street one again that we did tonight, where on the first hearing and public hearing, we went ahead and imposed the delay with the understanding with the applicant and their attorneys and so forth that, let's continue talking, continue working. I think we can work this out, but so yes, the clock has started, but we can probably resolve this more quickly than 12 months. And it seemed to work out okay.
Yep.
Okay, so unfortunately for many years in Newburyport, there was an ambiguity. It didn't say what happened if they didn't actually use the demolition approval after the 12 months, but we fixed that finally. So there's a window. They have to act within 6 months. And it has to be on the permit that was described in their application. You can't it's not like a game where they get through demolition delay and then they can apply for something else later. It's got to match. If they don't do it within those 6 months, they have to start over. Now, there are penalties. There has to be some hammer for illegal demolition, which unfortunately has happened in the report. And you can see what the consequences are.
So all adjoining parcels under common control, does that mean, it sounds like that might be the case of a developer that has some adjoining parcels?
Yes, I mean, an example would be the wine property, where there are several buildings or a development. That in Massachusetts, this often comes up with checkerboarding of lots, and having one lot owned by your wife and one by your cousin, and that doesn't fly. It all is looked at together.
I'm just curious, can you think of, off the top of your head, can you think of a case where this blackout has been applied locally recently?
No.
Oh, okay.
I can't.
Okay.
All right, so that's demolition delay, and it sounds like most of you are familiar with that already. Okay, now downtown, which is we're still learning 6 years in. And again, this is an overlay district. It's a form of zoning. Okay, so the intent, this is important because it's what allowed the ordinance after bitter fights over local historic districts to pass unanimously. So protect the land use pattern, city's architectural, cultural, economic, political, and social heritage through rehab, preservation, and enhancement of the historic downtown. So what I'm saying is there was unanimity on the city council, the legislature for Newburyport that downtown is special. This is a special area. It deserves the highest protection. So how do we deal with it? Well, special permit. Special permit, you know, there's some ambiguity in Massachusetts, but, and Andy may not agree entirely, but in my experience, it's kind of the Swiss Army knife of zoning in Massachusetts. Things are rarely allowed by right. You don't want to have to make people get variances. Special permit is basically the preponderance of evidence is such that the planning board says it's okay. Now, they have to get a special permit downtown for altering any character defining feature of the structure listed in that 1982 Newburyport Historic District. And they're relying on you, the commission, to provide an advisory report. And after they have your report, they cannot authorize the special permit for an alteration unless they make a finding that the Secretary of Interior standards and the specific standards written in the ordinance have been met. And so a good example is the recent restaurant that went into the old West Row. It was not going to meet the Secretary of Interior standards, and the commission told the board that, and they got the message. Now, there is some work that is excluded from downtown review, DOD review by the planning board, and that's Jennifer's call. She's specifically the person who decides that, and there is demolition delay that applies. Again, that was an important political compromise, and Jennifer will help you with that.
Can someone give an example of what might fall into that exemption?
Yes. So if you go down on these exclusions, you see alteration of a 1 or a 2 family building within an underlying residential district.
Uh-huh.
There's still demolition delay that applies, but they don't need a special permit.
Oh, I see. Yep, got it.
Okay. And again, to make it streamlined, Jennifer, as the zoning administrator, she decides whether the exclusion applies so that there's no argument. And if someone disagrees with her call, then they go to the Zoning Board of Appeal.
Okay.
Okay, so there's a lot here. You don't need to read it all, but essentially we're trying to, with the exception of the 1 and 2 family buildings, which is quite frankly a political compromise made, the rest of it's fairly intuitive. You know, if it's a temporary structure like a tent or something, they don't need a special permit. If they're altering, they're just doing maintenance and replacing in kind, they don't need a special permit. If they're altering something which isn't even historic, that was added later and doesn't contribute to the building, they don't have to do that. Another, I wouldn't say political, but logistical, is we exempted windows, doors, signs, and awnings. We didn't, at the city council, want to compel applicants, say on State Street, every time they changed a window, to go and get a special permit. Let's see, landscaping, and then there's a disaster exception. Okay, what's a character defining feature? Well, there's a lot of legalese here, but the idea is that it's exterior, not interior, exterior, and it's anything that's understood to contribute to significance of the structure when it was listed in 1982. So, because again, we didn't want to have a new argument every time. So we have copies, or I believe, of almost all of the data sheets, photos, and survey forms from 40 years ago. And, you know, those are all relevant. Anything in connection with that district from those days has to be considered. And it doesn't matter when it's dated, because not all of the material was done in the same year. Some of it was cobbled together over time. The second bullet point is important. I mean, for example, there was one planning board member who did not understand that an exterior architectural feature is not necessarily a thing. It can also be a style or a general arrangement or setting. This is understood in historic preservation nationwide and worldwide. It's not just, for example, that a particular storefront is from 100-year-old wood. It's that the pattern and the type and the style is historic rather than modern. And that is protected as an exterior architectural feature. Okay, so what happens here? So there's more deadlines. 30 days prior to submitting the application to the planning board, the owner, and it could be the developer on behalf of the owner, they have to give you, your commission, documentation so you can do your report. It's deliberately done prior so that you can do your work and you don't get jammed. Again, documentation, not unlike what you would get for demolition delay. Current photographs, historic photographs, plans, elevations, drawings, photographs of adjacent structures or setting. Again, staff will help you, of course, get this material, but if there's something you feel you're missing, because you don't have the right information, ask. It's really incumbent on the applicant to provide proper information. Okay, so 30 days after you get a complete application, your report is due. It's pretty short, but that's what's needed. So for demolitions, you explain in the report the significance of a structure and its importance within its setting. So not just the building as important by itself, but how it relates to its neighbors, because essentially downtown is an ensemble of buildings. That's why it's so attractive. For all other work, there are specific criteria in the DoD that staff can point you to. We refine that over time. Here are the standards for storefronts or windows or doors or chimneys or whatever. It's all in there. And again, don't be shy. If you recommend to the planning board, listen, we can't give you all of the expertise that you need to evaluate this application. We specifically wrote into the ordinance that the planning board can request that the owner help them hire somebody who knows. So that's the whole point. Now let's get the information. Let's get it.
Yeah, I would just add, Jared, that that setting is something that is very much on our minds with respect to 93 State Street. Where they're expanding the back at the Institute for Saving, and how that affects the setting in its particular environment.
Yep, no, those are relevant considerations. Okay, and again, the planning board, they can't just take your report and throw it away. I mean, they're supposed to take your historical report and also a professional's conditions report of the building, and they have to consider them. They can't just shoot from the hip. That was the deal. They also must adhere. We tighten this language. It's not optional. They have to adhere to the Secretary of Interior standards. All the language is there for you to read, but that's the gist of it. And it's not just the standards. There are guidelines that the Secretary of Interior has issued over the years, really getting into the esoterica of how to deal with buildings. They're all incorporated by reference into this ordinance. They're all relevant. Okay. Now the DCOD is truly the most unusual ordinance of all. And again, it's everything in the National Historic District, so the old part of the city, but not downtown. All right, so the intent, as I said, was there was political consensus across the spectrum that no one could really in good conscience justify raising obliterating, putting into a landfill an historic building, unless basically the building can't be saved. Those are the special permit conditions that the zoning board is to make. It's not intended to regulate mere alteration, even demolition of character defining features, because that was the deal. The deal was, all right, we're not satisfied with mere demolition delay, because all it does is give a 12-month reprieve to buildings that ultimately will be put into a landfill. So the focus of the DCOD is keep buildings from being destroyed, but it's not design review. That's the bargain. And then there's a list that staff has for you of all the buildings that are subject. Okay, so then we had to decide, all right, what does it mean to put a building in the landfill? We needed some practical rule. And the practical rule, for really lack of anything else, was if you demolish more than a quarter of the walls, most buildings are rectangular, not all of them, but if you demolish more than a quarter, that, of a contributor to the national district, you need a special permit to justify that. The concept being, most times, it would be the rear wall that's demolished. And the rear wall is okay to demolish. It's the least public. And we wanted to allow adaptive reuse of buildings. And it would still be recognizable if that rear wall were demolished, but not if the front were demolished. It's true. Okay, so again, the deciding body is the Zoning Board of Appeal this time, because they dominate in the neighborhoods versus downtown. But again, they need your historical report. And look at the finding that the zoning board has to make. It's very strict. Unless the structure retains, quote, no substantial remaining market value or reasonable use. And they have to take into account, yes, the cost of rehab, but it's the codes for historic structures, not new structures. And there are many, many exceptions for historic buildings that the building commissioner can grant nationwide, not just in Massachusetts. So again, only supposed to get a special permit to demolish one of these buildings if basically it's a total loss and cannot be saved. Okay. If it's less than 25% of the external walls, well, then it's not subject to DCOD, but there is demo delay that, that still can apply. And Jennifer really helped us tighten this up last year, because the roof line and the screwing around with dormers was slipping through, and we closed off that loophole. Maybe Jennifer can explain.
Well, so there are still dormers that are exempt, but they, the slide illustrates some that are, or the top two is an example of something that would be an acceptable dormer. You can see it's set back from the end wall. It's set up from the lower eave line, so that it really is secondary to the primary roof line. The lower one is an example of, at least on the vertical face, of a dormer under the previous code. And we all look at that and see a third floor, I think. That's what we're trying to avoid. It happens to be set back far enough on the front face that it might be exempt, but I do think the new guideline helps to allow certain pieces to move forward, allow people to put, for instance, a stair up into their attic, things like that, without creating a whole third floor.
And the language on this, if you could zoom out again and show the whole slide. The language on this was negotiated with several builders that cooperated, guys that have been around for decades, so we could reality check this of what was reasonable. Jennifer put her finger on it. What we don't want is people to call something a dormer that's really a new floor. Okay, so so non-contributors. If it's not a contributor, because there could be buildings that didn't get listed in 1982 that are in a neighborhood, there's still demolition delay. And again, you have the power to designate something as historically significant. So we've never used that power that I know of, but you can.
So Jared, how would that be triggered? Like, Jennifer, would that be, would you kind of, when that comes in, if it's not listed as contributing on, the list, someone would have to decide to have the historical commission look at it, right?
I would call it out if they were making a roof line change on a structure in the DCOD that's not listed as contributing, but they are making that roof line change. I would trigger it for a demo delay review process.
Okay.
You could look at the structure then and say, it's old, but it's not contributing, and then you would just release it.
Okay.
Or
I
you
see.
would not invoke demo delay.
Okay, so it'd just be part of the demo delay process. Okay, thanks.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, so then there are these strict rules before something gets put in the landfill. Again, you're supposed to get time ahead. Your task is a little less here than it would be downtown, so it's 21 days instead of 30 that the owner has to give you the application. And again, all of the information that you would need. Shorter timelines. So within 20 days after the complete application is received, you're supposed to give your report. Again, relative importance, not just of the structure intrinsically, but in the context. In this ordinance, it refers to the city block, but it's the same concept, the ensemble, the context. Again, the ZBA, they're sheepish about it, or used to be, but they can really insist on a professional being engaged, and it's not, despite what some builders may say, it's not that hard to find professionals to do this work. And again, just as in downtown, the planning board must consider these reports. They have to consider your historical report and whatever conditions report comes in. Did we go back? We go back. What happened?
Hey, I wonder if I could have a quick question, Jared, because it came up tonight that we were reviewing that one on Monroe Street, and the attorney was saying that, well, the only thing we should be concerned about is whether what they're planning to demolish is going to remove something historic and so forth. But reading this, it seems that relative importance of historic structure in context of city block, that could be interpreted as including the comments I was saying about, well, we might want to have something in our historic report that says, we think that the overall size of what you're planning to do kind of has a bit of a negative impact on the neighborhood or something like that. So is this a kind of a case of interpretation or what?
Well, it's a tough one. I can say I don't think we contemplated that. Again, it's the importance of the structure. So if what they're doing is they're demolishing a structure which now currently fits within its context, it's in scale with its neighbors, and and they're replacing it with something that sticks out like a sore thumb, that is absolutely relevant to your report.
Yeah, this one's kind of boring. Okay, so, it's getting late, so I don't want to interrupt with too many questions.
Okay. All right, and then finally, there's sort of miscellaneous tasks that we turn to, and that is we need advice on these preservation restrictions, and I'll explain what those are in one slide. So it's really an easement, just like you can have an easement to park your car on someone else's land. The city can take, the historical commission on behalf of the city can take an easement on a building. So, and I give the history, we used to have these downtown. Again, we didn't extend them for some reason. What's done is done. It's a bit complex. The Mass Historical Commission has to review them too because of state law, but you are our experts at the city for what the preservation restrictions should say. The city council reviews them as well before the mayor may sign them, but you're the experts. Oh, and how are these things enforced? It's really by injunction. In Massachusetts, ultimately, if things totally change, you won't be able to enforce them anymore. But so long as the neighborhood is the same, you can go into court and get a court order to stop them. And then I think this is it. So the Mass Historical Commission which is, that has a lot of expertise, but is understaffed. And it's funny, it's the only agency I've ever dealt with in my career where they say, don't call us and don't come to our office. Kind of interesting. So they're hard to get in touch with. Anyway, they're going to refer to you as the local experts. So sometimes the Mass Historic is doing a review. So say there's federal funding or permitting or state funding or permitting to do something. A good example would be the Titcomb Street garage that Andy managed. And that involved state and federal funding. So they needed some advice from the Newburyport Historical Commission. They consult with you. And again, everyone's using the same language, which is Secretary of Interior standards. All right, I think I've gone on long enough. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Councilor Eigenman. This is Andy. And I'll defer to the chair whether you wanted to. We had talked previously whether it would make sense to go through the salient elements of a preservation restriction. I don't care frankly myself whether that's tonight or another night, but we could cover that in another meeting if you prefer. It's up to you.
Yeah, I think it might be best because it's getting pretty late. And there were one or two quick questions. There's the most pressing question that I'd love to just cover tonight, Andy and Jared, is about recusal. Patrick, this was kind of your question. Shall I ask it for you, or would you like to speak to it? And that's with the Institution for Saving situation and your involvement in that neighborhood. So you're muted at the moment, but did you want?
It's Peter. That's why he's not answering.
I'm sorry, Peter McNamee. Yes, see how late it is.
I'm sorry, I was having trouble with my speakers shutting off, so I missed the last part of it.
Okay, basically, yeah, I want we've gone through the presentation. Peter, did you want to ask your question about recusal in the case of the Institution for Savings and what that involves, or shall I ask it? Go ahead and ask it.
You or I doesn't matter to me, Glenn, so I'll defer to you if you want.
Well, okay. In general, Jared or Andy, I'd love some clarification on recusals. Peter, in this specific case, to make this concrete, Peter's in the neighborhood. He's not a direct abutter, but he is in the very close vicinity to the Institution for Savings project there, and has had some involvement. I think his concern is that he doesn't want to have the appearance of a conflict there, and he also doesn't want to do anything that might tarnish the report or decisions made by the commission, and for the applicant to cry foul, oh, you've got a commissioner in there who's dead set against us, or whether that's true or not, but anything like that. So can you clarify what the rules are exactly as far as when we need to recuse ourselves? And does that mean we just can't vote, or do we have to leave the room entirely, or what?
I can answer that. We deal with that all the time in the city council. Essentially, to boil it down, there's a whole handbook that you can read, but if there's an economic interest by the commissioner or a close relative, that commissioner should recuse him or herself every time. And I'll get to the specific case. And the recusal means no participation. Sometimes on the planning board, people are a little loose about it, but at the council, the best practice is literally to leave the chamber during that item so that there's no appearance of impropriety. That's what the Attorney General advises. Mm-hmm. Now, when is there an economic interest? Obviously, it's property values is usually the argument. And so if you're a direct abutter, that's easy. I would also say an abutter within 300 feet. So it's like the notice rule. Mm-hmm. But also, I think Peter's asking the right question, which is how will it reflect on the body? So if you feel that it could be perceived that you have an economic interest, and I do mean economic interest, you probably should recuse. One thing I want to clarify is you do not have to recuse yourself because you have an opinion. That doesn't quite I remember Andy and I were kind of doing battle at one point with the Port Plaza. And the owner was saying, Andy's biased against strip malls. And the answer is, yes, he is. He's a city planner, you know. So everyone on the historical commission is biased in favor, I would hope, of historic buildings. So that's not a problem, okay? It's economic interest.
I see.
Yeah, I agree with everything Councilor Eigenman has said. I think whenever board members have asked this sort of question over the years, I generally recommend the same thing I think Councilor Eigenman got at, which is if you can avoid at all even the appearance of a conflict of interest, even if the connection is somewhat remote, to the development party involved or the property owner or the radius that you are from the other property. I think it's always best to recuse yourself, if not because it meets the letter of the law, because it's better to avoid even the suggestion or the argument that there was any impropriety going on. So it's better for all of your all board roles and anything that comes out of any of the documentation that comes out of that. It's always good if you can recuse yourself from any such matter. And as always, I'd recommend just consulting me or someone else on the staff here if you have questions about that. These questions come up periodically, and they're usually pretty easy to clarify in a given instance whether or not it makes sense to recuse oneself.
Okay, thanks, Andy. So Peter, does that help you out?
It helps me out. I'm still not entirely clear on the degree to which I recuse myself. Clearly, I wouldn't vote. I think I hear now that I wouldn't even deliberate whether or not I can be present and speak as a property owner, which I guess would constitute economic interest. So I guess that answers that question, but it would be necessary to leave the chamber. Is that what I'm hearing as well?
Yeah, that's what the Attorney General advises. I realize it's difficult because just because you become a commissioner or a city councilor, you don't give up your own right to speak. So it's difficult, but that's the advice. Councilor Vogel often has had this come up because he has businesses downtown, and he does sometimes attend. But it even matters how big the room is. I mean, for example, if you're going to be doing a Zoom call, you certainly should be able to listen to the Zoom call. There's no impropriety there. It really has to do with the appearance if you're in a small room together and your colleagues are looking at you.
How about the letters that I've had published in the paper?
Again, you don't forfeit your right, and those letters were not, as I understand it, you weren't lobbying your colleagues. That would be a no-no. You can't use your relationship with Glenn and Patricia and the other commissioners, but you're not stifled from free speech. You don't have to silence yourself.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
By the way, I know why I called you Patrick, because that's the guy in the Avengers, right? Glenn, did you watch the
I don't know.
Patrick McEwen.
I think I'm just getting punchy.
Okay.
So we have a couple minor items on our agenda still. Let me first of all thank you, Jared Eigenman, so much for the work you put in this. I know it means a lot to you, and you've been really, I think you've been a great asset to the city in terms of historic preservation and getting these ordinances cleared up. So I really appreciate the work.
I'm glad to do it, and you have good staff to advise you. Lean on them.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Eigenman.
Okay, well, I hope for particularly Joe and Peter, I hope that was helpful. I think it was helpful even to me, and I think for our other members who've been around a while, I hope it was also helpful to you as well. You have the, that what he's calling a handbook, that presentation, we have that now, and as Andy says, they'll keep that up to date and so on. So, we skipped over approval of minutes, but let's not forget to do that. That's from 5/28. That was our last meeting. And I know Patricia pointed out there was a couple of clarifications we made to those, which, Gretchen has done. So, for the sake of time, I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the minutes as amended most recently by Gretchen, the minutes from 5/28. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Patricia. I see a hand up from Christopher. Did you have a question, comment, objection?
Why don't we go ahead and vote on the minutes, and then I can ask that question.
Okay. Well, as long as you've got your mic on, Christopher, are you in favor of approving the minutes?
Yes.
Okay. Peter?
Yes.
Okay. Ron?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
And myself is a yes, and I assume,
Yes.
Patricia, you're okay. Okay, so the minutes are unanimously approved as amended. Go ahead, Chris, did you want to make a comment or ask a question?
I just want to know if we're going to continue as a group to have this discussion. That was helpful. We're going to continue future meetings to discuss. I guess the reason I bring it up is for the second time in as many weeks maybe, or we've been sort of told by an attorney representing a client what we can and cannot do. And I'm not sure I'm totally clear on some of maybe the finer points. So
yeah,
if we're not planning on it, I would suggest maybe we try to do that. Or...
Yep. Well, you may or may not have noticed, and I see your hand up, Patricia, too, so we'll get to you in a second, that I handled this a little bit differently than the time a few meetings ago. I'm personally feeling a lot more comfortable with my knowledge of the ordinances. The short answer to the question is yes. I think this is an ongoing discussion because the ordinances can be complex and there are those gray areas of interpretation. So the short answer, Chris, is yes. I think we'll continue to have questions and we'll continue to engage with folks like Andy and the staff and counselors like Eigerman to clarify things. If you notice tonight, when Ms. Mead attempted to, or not attempted, asserted what our role was, I simply said, your comments are noted. However, I feel confident that we're within our rights to put X, Y, Z in the report. So. And that's kind of how I left it. So
I think it was well handled. So I don't want to prolong this discussion any more than anybody else does. But the comment is there's no city ordinance that says this, and my thought was there's probably no city ordinances that cover a ton of things, right?
Yeah. Right.
Therefore, because it doesn't say that you can't do it, you can do it, and that's not. I don't really see that as our role to kind of rubber stamp things that aren't already on the city ordinance. If it's on the city ordinance that prohibits it, then they don't need us. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Could I chime in quickly?
Sure.
First of all, I really appreciate all the work that went into the slides. I think everyone should hang these in poster form all over their home. And we have really good attorneys in Newburyport. If I need something done, I will call one of them because I know they work really hard representing my interests. But they represent the interests of applicants. They present arguments and interpretations suited to their goals. That's what they're supposed to do. But we are serving the city, and it's inherent in all of these boards that there's going to be conflict because everyone who comes to the Newburyport Historical Commission wants to alter or demolish all or part of an historic building, and we're all here because we don't want that to happen, and we don't want development that's not sensitive and protective of our houses and neighborhoods. And it's a thankless task, and you will get criticized and your authority will be challenged, but as long as we know the ordinances and apply the standards and sort of stand our ground, this city will be so much better off for our efforts. And I just really appreciate everyone who's on this commission. I know the meeting was really long tonight. Zoom sucks. I'm Zoom exhausted. It's a lot of work to do, but it's our job to know the rules and to apply them and to interpret them. And we've never been arbitrary or vague. I think that we have not exercised our authority sufficiently. And I hope that this is sort of a new beginning now that everything is written down and very clear. So thank you everyone for hanging in there tonight.
Yeah, and I would, the only thing I would add to that is something I said earlier about during Mr. Eigerman's presentation, that when we do assert our role, which is perfectly proper and appropriate, we just need to be not arbitrary, as we discussed a little bit earlier, and we need to be able to defend our position. And I think, you know, as long as we can do that, which I think, I know I'm personally try to be careful to do so, then I think we'll be perfectly fine. Okay,
Glenn,
yes?
sorry, this is Andy. If I could
Yep.
just jump in there real quick. I think that the presentation that Councilor Agaman, he put together most of the text in those slides, and Jennifer and I provided some additional information to supplement and kind of flesh it out. And again, I'll defer to you whether you want to take up any kind of detailed discussion on PRs, but I would suggest if commissioners have any thoughts on areas where you're looking for greater clarification, or you have a question about something that maybe we didn't answer sufficiently, that is the reason why we might perhaps update the booklet and the presentation slides so that all commission members now and in the future can continue to go back to that as a resource. And I think the reason why Councilor Agaman wanted to spend some time on this with us was to make sure that you as commission members do have that level of confidence in, as Glenn said, in your own ordinances, so that you're not essentially duped by, you know, an attorney or developer who wants to assert, you know, what they want to have happen, you know, as Patricia pointed out, their interpretation or one that's beneficial to their application, but rather your full understanding of the scope of your jurisdiction. Clearly, there are limitations to all boards' jurisdiction at some point, but to make sure that you fully understand your jurisdiction, your role. And again, we're here to help out with any new little pieces that aren't filled in there. But if you want to ask us questions or have us follow up on something, and we can circle back to get you clarification.
Yeah, and I think we will need to pick up on the preservation restrictions, Andy, particularly if we do need to re-review the Central Church one. But you know, they come up often enough that I think it would be helpful to go over those just so we're familiar with the overall layout of those. I don't think that would take an inordinate amount of time.
No, it would be relatively brief. I would ask, I guess, if you don't mind, maybe we'll just, Caitlin and I will ask Diane to carry it on the next couple of agendas. If you can't handle it at your next meeting because you've got the institution or anything else that you're taking time with, then we can carry it to the next meeting and take it up then.
Okay.
What do you?
Yeah. If you guys want to start sort of outlining that'd be great, because we do want to follow up on that.
Okay, yeah, we'll just carry it on the next agenda or two until we, and assuming you have time for it at one of the end meetings. And
Okay.
I'll flip through a preservation restriction and just kind of summarize some of the key points and sections that I think you'd want to pay attention to as commission members and understand how they are important to the preservation restriction and the features you're trying to protect and the legal issues involved. So.
Okay. One last peripheral comment. I kept my video on for most of this meeting because I did find during the planning board meeting, it was somehow made it feel more real in a way to see the chair, Bonnie Sontag, to actually see her there talking and so on. So I left my camera on for most of the time. Did people find that distracting or just helpful or neither? Any thoughts on that? And
I like it. I wish you'd wear funny hats, but it's a helpful focal point.
Maybe the arrow through the head.
Yeah, it works for me.
Yeah, I would agree. I like it.
Okay. Well, think about whether you want to, you have the capability of doing your video. So I'll leave it up to you. And Peter, I'd love to know how you got that static picture. I'll have to look through my various settings. Maybe I have a static picture I want to put up if I don't feel like doing video. But anyway, we've
don't use the same picture.
What's that?
Just don't use my picture.
No, I won't use yours. All right. So I think most people are ready to hear a motion to adjourn unless someone else has something else.
No, Glenn, I'm sorry. This is Andy again. I just wanted to note that Malcolm was apparently attempting to join the meeting earlier, but he had ended up in the attendees list. I tried to promote him to a panelist as we had tried and done successfully before, but for some reason he was not going through. And then I tried to unmute him and that didn't seem to work either. And then he kind of disappeared. So he may have been having some sort of technical issue and we can follow up with him, but just wanted to let you know that it looked like he was trying to attempt to connect at the beginning of the meeting.
Okay.
Andy, the last three meetings, I had a similar problem. You might remember for the first 15-20 minutes, I was in the attendees list and not a panelist. And last time I learned that it's because in the Zoom invitation that goes out, the standard that we all got, because I've got Zoom loaded onto my machine, the actual client, I take the meeting ID and I enter it in join meeting and the password and whatnot, and that puts you in the attendees room. If you click on the link, I found that puts you as a panelist. For some reason, there's that difference. So maybe Malcolm is making the same mistake I was making.
Yeah, and that may be part of it, I guess. And you're right. The link that was provided in those automatic emails, which I did actually send to him, by the way, when I noticed he was having some trouble, I resent the invitation email to him. The link is important, like I've said before, because it makes you immediately a panelist when the meeting is going on and starts up, and that's better. Obviously, when we go live, I can try to find you in the attendees list and promote you to a panelist, but it's not clear to me why I was not able to successfully move him to a panelist position. He may have been having some technical issue on his end that I couldn't quite be aware of. I couldn't communicate with him.
Well, thanks for letting me know. I hope, I know Caitlin is still on. Caitlin, can you try following up with Malcolm? I know he usually answers his cell phone okay. Maybe you guys can try to figure out what,
Yeah, I'll try and find out what he was experiencing during
Yeah.
the meeting. I will. Yep.
That'd be great. Thanks, Caitlin. Okay, does anyone care to make a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, someone has said, sounded like Joe. Okay, and I'll assume, Patricia, you're in favor?
Yes.
I am in favor. Peter?
Yes.
Christopher?
Yes.
Okay, Ron?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
I think that's all of us. Well, 10:25 p.m. It was a long one. Thanks everyone for sticking with us. Good meeting. I'm pretty pleased with our progress. Of course, we have some, well, I have some work to do. I've got to put together quickly that report on 342 Merrimack and so on, but pretty happy, I'm pretty happy with the overall result. I think we made a lot of progress towards getting the preservation that was appropriate to that particular structure. And I think that'll work out okay. At least I hope it will. So thanks very much to everybody. I'll bid you good night and stay well.
Have a good evening.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.